1:05 p.m. We apologize for the delay, a little bit of trouble with our connections to get it streaming live. And in the spirit of reconciliation, we wish to acknowledge the enduring relationship between Indigenous peoples and the territories they have traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection they have to this place, the land, the water, the sky, and all that live on, in, and above it. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this place and who continue to care for it. And we want to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they guide our decisions and our actions. Commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take action towards real truth and reconciliation. Miigwech. Council, any declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest or anything else you think we need to know before you participate in this afternoon's meeting? Thank goodness his mic wasn't on. All right. With that, I'd like to welcome to our chambers James Steele, who's the Commissioner of Engineering and Public Works, District of Muskoka, and Chris Hyde, District Manager, Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks. Gentlemen, welcome. Before the interrogation begins, do either of you want anything you'd like to say to us? Well, if not, let's begin. Any councillor want to have any questions? I see none. I'll say thank you very much for coming. But I'm going to ask a question or two while they decide what they're going to ask. Mr. Steele, I just want you to confirm some numbers that I may have out to lunch, so that's why I'm asking. The percentage of our residents that have roadside pickup, I think, is in the 30%, 1/3 range.
To the chair, it sounds reasonable. I don't have the number, okay, the exact percentage off the top of my head.
Okay. Second question, of those people's roadside pickup, how many of them at this point have green bin pickup?
I don't have that number off the top of my head either.
I know at least some of them don't. I didn't know how many did, but okay. Maybe I should have sent them to you in advance.
But thank you for that. I think what I would say is that the intent is to roll it out at all curbside customers. So if they haven't received it yet, then in the next year or so it'll be fully rolled out across the district.
All right. Those questions allowed me to give everybody a chance, time, and Councillor Graziano put his hand up. So we're going to go over to Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, and through your worship, gentlemen, thank you for attending today. It's great to see you taking an active interest in our waste issues. A question to Commissioner Steele, if I can. Commissioner Steele, there's something that I have in the back of my car that pertains to our conversation today, sitting there, and I'm sure you can likely guess what that is. Well, there you go, and that was process of deduction, and we're here. The reason for this is because of the hours. Now, I come off of South Gibson Lake Road, Muskoka Road 33, which there is a bin facility there that I could use when open. However, it wasn't open today, this morning upon my coming to the office, and likely will not be open upon my return home. Baxter at the time was not open as I was traveling southbound on the 400 this morning, and Baxter would likely be closed on my way home. And my example today is one that every one of my constituents have complained about over and over and over again. The hours are not there to work around their schedules, and it is incredibly hard for them to discard of garbage. So I guess my first question of many is, given the changes that are about to our residents will see shortly. And based on a discussion that you and I had in December on the need to survey the community on operational hours, and a previous conversation to that whereby you'd said that you would be adjusting hours frequently and trying to determine what fits and what works. What is the district currently looking at doing to accommodate the hours and to accommodate the fact that right now the hours just are not suitable for our community?
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's a really great question. We have talked about it. We do receive feedback from many residents, about the hours at our sites. It's certainly not possible to have the sites open 24/7. It's certainly not a reasonable approach. If you drove by South Gibson Lake, there should be a sign out on the front entrance now saying, "Sorry, we missed you. Please let us know when you were here so we can make adjustments to the hours going forward." If the sign's not up, it'll be up this week. So that is one of the things that we're doing to collect data to understand when people are visiting the stations and make sure that the hours are suitable for them. It's just not, unfortunately, and I think the other part to remember is we're still in winter hours, which there's a lot less volume in the community. Yes, it wasn't perhaps, unfortunately, convenient for you today, but we do have fairly generous hours when you look at municipal operations. And South Gibson, unfortunately, it's just not reasonable to have it open every day of the week. And so, so what are we working on? We will receive that feedback. We'll review the communication from the community, and then we'll determine what the appropriate hours are. And I think the one piece that I'll mention is that the depot hours, I mean, certainly the depot hours are funded 100% by Georgian Bay taxpayers. And so if council wanted to open them up 24/7, it's certainly possible. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is something that is fully on the way the tax levy is calculated. It's fully on Georgian Bay taxpayers. So if you want longer hours, there's certainly an opportunity, but you have to balance what the community is willing to, I believe, you have to balance what the community is willing to pay versus the convenience. And it's unfortunate that the timing didn't work for you, but I think the other part to remember is they are winter hours, and we do have longer hours in the summer.
May I? I have a few additional things. Thank you. And I appreciate your response. Am I to understand correctly then that our municipality does have the ability to control the operational hours of these facilities? Did I hear that correctly, or maybe I misheard?
Given that we're in Cal, let's not have me nodding my head back and forth and saying yes or no. I mean, I got to try to control council so each one's get their turn. But please, gentlemen, when a question's asked, just go ahead and respond.
Sure, thank you. Well, I guess the answer is ultimately yes. But I think the fact is we have to be reasonable in how do we actually staff that. So I think it has to be operationalized. If there was a request to extend the hours to whatever amount, that is possible. But again, it goes back to it needs to be part of a service level change as part of the budget process. So if that request comes forward, we can certainly consider it. Council at the district approves it, and it gets adjusted. And that's how the service level changes happen at the district.
Thank you. And just carrying on some of the concerns that I have, a lot of constituents have currently complained to the fact that they're being double taxed. And what they mean by that, or what allow me to build on that or elaborate, is that they are provided with a 2-bag limit per week. And they arrive at one of the facilities and they have 3 or 4 bags. Those bags may be recycling inside of it. There may be other things within the garbage. There may be a broom, as an example, outside of a bag, and they're being charged for what would it be otherwise household waste. What are we doing to ensure that that doesn't happen? A lot of constituents have complained to me saying that they've had to pay $12 for a broom handle or an old chair. But it was household waste, and why do they have to pay for this when they're paying their property taxes? Over to you. Thank you.
So I guess the quick answer is the bylaw sets the limits on what's acceptable at a transfer station. So if they're over the 2-bag limit on a weekly basis, then unfortunately they have to pay the appropriate fee. That's set out in the district's waste management bylaw. There are models that municipalities use, not the district. And certainly as we do the solid waste master plan, we are going to look at the way the waste levy is calculated. And there are things called pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-throw, for example. So what that means is the person pays for every bag they throw out. If you want 4 bags, you pay for 4 bags. If you have 1 bag, you pay for 1 bag. That's not the model the district has, and it's not possible to implement given the fact that there's free access to drop-off facilities. So once we move to a licensed operation where every facility is monitored and tracked and the waste is tracked and managed, then we can perhaps consider a pay-as-you-throw type model, which includes every bag has a bag tag. And so that might alleviate the concerns they have. I don't know, because I haven't spoken to any individuals that had that concern, but certainly it is a model that exists in the industry. It's just, again, it's not feasible if there's no control over what people can put where.
And one final, if I may, additional question. A recent report of the district staff had advised that, I guess, your intent is to scale the curbside pickup for your communities within your jurisdiction. Yeah, we had 2 separate residences recently come to the district of Muskoka requesting curbside pickup, and they were delayed by what will be assumed as 2 years. I understand that staff had declined their request because of the current garbage conversion initiative that's underway and how busy they are. And I also believe that there was another bylaw that perhaps you have not drafted that would recognize private roads. And so what are you doing to expedite this to ensure that A, you, I guess, live up to staff's suggestions, and B, as we transition away from what we currently have to more demand on the limited facilities that we may or may not have, how are we going to offset that through additional curbside pickup? And what are you going to do to prioritize private roads and their approvals?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. There is a council resolution that directs staff to hold off on adding any new private road service until we have a policy in place. Service had been added to private roads on a more ad hoc and informal basis historically, and what it's proven is that we've had trouble with those road owners about maintaining the road and keeping it reasonable and accessible so that we can provide a consistent level of service. And so through that, staff recommended to committee and council, and it was subsequently approved, to hold off on adding any additional private roads until the policy can be developed and necessary agreements can be implemented. So the answer is, I believe the report says as early as 2026, but we'll be working on that once we finish the bin site transition, which is 2026. For the specific roads that are impacted by the bin site transition, those are already approved to move to curbside collection if it's appropriate, if it's available. So for roads that are currently road access and the truck can travel, they will transition to curbside collection. That's certainly our first opportunity because it increases the level of service for those property owners. But that being said, the intent is to reduce the number of additional units being added to this informal private road collection because we're finding that it's almost impossible to maintain a level of service that's expected of a residence. When someone comes on curbside collection, there's an expectation that the truck goes by every week, collects their material and moves on. If a road isn't maintained to a proper level, whether it's soft spots in the spring or not cleared in the winter, we're finding that those trucks are getting sent away because they can't safely travel the road. And then the calls come into us and say, why haven't you met my level of service? And so the reason why that was implemented is because the folks who are currently on private roads that are receiving that service have not been standing or haven't been meeting the expectations to make sure the trucks can travel safely. And so the intent of the policy is to develop very specific criteria for us to collect on those roads. and have an agreement with the property owners of those roads that guarantees that they will be maintained to a certain level so that we can provide a reliable service. So that when it's Tuesday and it's your collection day, you know that if you put out the right stuff and you put out the right number of bags, they will be collected by the end of the day.
Thank you.
I do have more questions, but I'll reserve them until everyone else has.
CEO Mariotta, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Coetzee. I should have jumped in from the start, because I should have maybe made a bit of an introduction to the whole process. And as council knows, we had a brainstorming session where we kind of narrowed down some ideas and some options for the district to consider for the future of the management of solid waste here in the township. And those ideas have been shared with Commissioner Steele and Mr. Hyde, who have graciously donated their time to be here, so that they can act as a possible resource to elaborate on some of the options that that council has come up with for the brainstorming session. So, if it's possible for council to kind of pose the questions in relation to how are we going to look at the future of solid waste in the township? And there were lots of ideas during the brainstorming session. We had some assumptions, and this is the chance really to elaborate on those assumptions and check for any validity. You know, does it make sense? Or, you know, from a regulatory perspective, from a district perspective, so that then staff can come back and consolidate 3 or 4 options that the district can actually go and cost out for us. So that's basically where I'd like to frame the context of this meeting. I know there's been issues in the past. I know there are hours of the transfer stations that may not be agreeable to some of our ratepayers. The reality is, as Commissioner Steele has said, the district is open to listen to some of the feedback that we have so that we can modify the level of service at a certain cost. So if Chair Coetzee, if you can maintain that kind of direction of the question, so that we can hopefully get this done in a reasonable time.
It's challenging to restrict the individual councillors, but we'll do our best. And Councillor Cooper, we're going to go to you for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, gents, for coming today, and we'll see what we can work on here. I have a couple of questions and observations. One is that, you know, it's great to talk about adding this service or that service, and on we could go, the things that we'd like to have. But we can't really get anywhere, in my mind, unless we know what things are going to cost. And we can't seem to get full cost breakouts from the district. And without that, we're shooting in the dark. So I would like to know what you can do about that, because, yeah, we're shooting in the dark. And if we just willy-nilly add in services, or if we decide that we want 18-hour services at all our bin sites, we're going to go bankrupt. We might be able to afford, as an example, and I think I've had this kind of conversation with you, you know, we might be able to have fairly significant hours of business at our 2 transfer stations, one in the north and one in the south. So maybe 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. But we couldn't afford, if we did that, I don't see how we can afford to have many more transfer stations. It's just too expensive. So to the question, though, breaking out the costs is the first thing that I wanted to ask you, because we need affordable solutions, not just solutions. And so that my idea with the extra hours at the big transfer stations might help to a certain extent. It's not going to solve the problem at the marinas with the water access community. That's another matter, but it may help us in terms of providing service to a high number of our community, many of whom, by the way, can't even use, they have curbside pickup, but they can't use it because they're not there. And if they're not there, they're worried about the garbage being spread all over the place. So they end up going to a transfer station. So we've got all this sort of service that we're providing, but nobody's using it. I see this in many of our communities. Anyway, back to my question, costs. How are we going to get sort of an, even if it's ballpark, James, is there some way that we can get an idea of what each type of service costs us? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. I think it's a great question, and really that's what we're hoping to receive as part of this discussion, is to come up with a number of options that we can do a full financial analysis on and present those to district council and committee as a viable option as we move out of the unlicensed dumpster sites. I did share with a number of members of council the detailed breakdown by bin site, by service. So I think there is information that's available. It's just not and I think you and I spoke about this. It's not as, we don't track it as in a detailed fashion as you were hoping. But I think when you think about a transition to a new service, it kind of, in my mind, is moot in a sense that the dumpsters are going because they're certainly, they don't meet the requirements of the Environmental Protection Act. And so to try to get through the minutia of detailed costing for the current dumpster sites is probably not worth the effort in my mind. But I think the hope is that we'll have a narrowed down number of viable options for the township. And then we can go back and present the costs associated with those and make an informed decision based on service level, cost, and environmental protection. And I think the other piece that I'd like to share is the needs and wants study made it clear, or identified the need to add 10 additional depots, additional lakeside service, expand curbside service. And that is a substantial increase in the tax levy, in the waste levy for Township of Georgian Bay residents. And so the reason why we brought that report earlier this year recommending to do a detailed financial analysis is exactly as you described. We want to make sure that everyone's going in with eyes wide open. I think it would be unreasonable to present options to our council and committee without the financial impacts. And so you need that information to make the decision. But what I'm hoping is that out of this meeting, we'll have a few recommended or options to consider. And like you mentioned, extended hours at the transfer stations. Perhaps that's an option you'd like us to do a financial analysis on. And that's where we would provide those details, if that's helpful.
All right, thank you. Councillor Predko, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thanks for coming in this afternoon. Appreciate the time and the information that you're going to be providing with us. One question I have, and this is Committee of the Whole, and we will have this recorded for people in the public. Just wondering if we can walk through, we have the unsupervised bin sites that we know the MECP has given direction that these need to cease in their current form, and we have options for what we're going to do with them. But what's the timeline right now for addressing that, and barring any new supervised depots or anything else, what is kind of the baseline for dealing with that situation?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I think I believe the latest update that we have, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's fall 2026. All the unlicensed sites need to transition to licensed service that meet the requirements of the EPA. Does that sound right? Sorry. And so the plan is to really come up with a number of ideas and options and have that transition well in advance of the deadline of 2026 to make sure that the community has not just the community has time to transition and be comfortable with it, but also that and so the idea here is to make sure that we're sharing what the transition looks like, let folks know where the alternative options are, what we've considered. But our intent, and it's in the report that we presented earlier this year at committee, is to start considering some of those transitions for 2025. And that's mainly to make sure that we're not up against the wall and we won't have an opportunity to communicate with the public to meet the timelines.
And then I know this has been discussed offline in different forums. Some of these unregulated garbage bin sites, whatever we're referring to them exactly as today, are at marina sites or adjacent to marina sites. And I think some conversations have taken place in terms of what would be required to transfer responsibility from the district to private operators if they removed it from being a formal garbage or waste collection site altogether, but had it as a private commercial operation. How does that fall within different pieces of jurisdiction, and what kind of how would that process work out or not work out in your opinion?
So thank you, and through the chair, maybe I'll start, and then maybe Chris can add on to the process and what would be undertaken. I guess what I would say is it's possible to transition. We had a marina in Bracebridge that went down that path. Unfortunately, chose to change paths after they got their approval, but. And I think I circulated, maybe not to everyone, but circulated to some folks the environmental compliance approval for that facility. So the requirements are pretty well laid out. I believe the process was pretty quick after the application came in. And so maybe if that helps starting to answer your question, but even going more into the detail of the process, I don't know if Mr. Hyde can elaborate.
And just to, I think one of the areas was the cost around how expensive and how long it takes to kind of do this type of transition.
Through you, Your Worship, the process is the same whether it's a municipally owned transfer station or a private marina owned transfer station. As James indicated, the approval is fairly quick because we've been working with our colleagues at Approvals Branch, and we have a dedicated review engineer that will work on applications for Muskoka and for any new transfer stations, whether they're municipal or private. And we'll be using like sort of a cookie cutter approach, so they'll be essentially the same, other than some local identification requirements or anything like that. The process is usually it has to be posted on the Environmental Bill of Rights for public comment for a period of 45 days, but then after that it's about 3-4 months to turn around an application. Without them being expedited, it's typically about a year. But in this case, we've asked for all of the applications coming through in relation to the bin site transition to be expedited and to have the dedicated review done so that the timeline can be cut in half. One of the differences between a municipal transfer station and a private transfer station is the private owner would have to provide what's called financial assurance, which is a sum of money provided to the ministry that we will hold in case the owner abandons the facility, so that we can come in or direct the municipality to come in and clean up the site, remove the waste, and decommission it. And then the funds are available to cover all of those costs. For municipality, that we don't require financial assurance for municipality because they generally don't disappear. We're hoping they're here forever. So, but the costs will be dependent on the size of the facility that the proponent wants to construct. You've got the application has to be completed by a professional engineer, and all of the diagrams and everything's stamped. It has to take into consideration stormwater management, separation distances from sensitive receivers like water, surface water, also distance from things like schools, residences, any sort of a sensitive receiver that could be impacted from odors or vectors and vermin and stuff like that. So, but it'll be a fairly standard process. We want to make it as quick and as simple and cost effective as we can. But again, the individual costs will vary depending on the marina. And something that if you're talking to marina operators, have them contact their insurance company, because they'll want to make sure that the activity they're proposing is covered under their insurance, and so that any of the liability is there for any environmental impacts or spills or fires from the transfer facility.
And that site would need to be, have controlled access and supervision, or is it more basic and similar to what's currently out there today for these bin locations?
Well, the legislation is very specific in that any waste management facility in the province has to be staffed when it is open and to receive waste.
Thank you for that. And then one further area of question I have with the chair's indulgence. Just on staffing hours for the supervised sites that we have, I'm interested to learn this is how we could change hours and make recommendations for hours in terms of coming back and it having to go to council, district council to get approved. I'm wondering if, I know district provides collection of waste management services, but would there be an opportunity in the future for the staff that supervise these locations be township employees, so that we could set the hours differently and work through an agreement with district, so that while the district was doing the collection, we were doing the supervision? And that might provide some more flexibility and more dynamic flexibility than what we're currently experiencing today.
So through the chair, excuse me, to Councillor Predko. I mean, I guess anything's possible. It wouldn't be something that we would want to do, I don't believe. But you know, I guess anything's possible. If that's the model that wanted to be considered, then certainly I think that's fine. I think the one thing to keep in mind is any number of hours is going to require an associated operational budget. And so that's why those kind of decisions need to happen during the budget process. So that to make sure that there are funds there and they're approved by council. You know, we do have a third-party contractor doing that work now. I don't think it's impossible to conceive that a Georgian Bay staff member is running the site, as long as they have the appropriate training and they're managing the site appropriately. So I guess it perhaps remains to be seen. I don't know if it's happened before, but perhaps we could be the first.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelton, please.
Thank you, and welcome, James and Chris. I'll start off, James. We've talked, you heard Councillor Cooper talk about numbers. Have you been able to come to us today and tell us what it would cost just for the two existing Baxter Tower Roads transfer sites?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't have those exact numbers, but it is in our annual budget. And if you give me one moment, I can pop it up. Sorry about that, with your indulgence. Mr. Chair, I don't know if there's another question that perhaps we can answer while I'm looking this up. I just don't want to waste everyone's time.
So I have a whole bunch of questions, so there's certainly no shortage of that. I wanted to just cycle back to roadside for a second. So one of the things that I'm concerned about on the roadside, although I like the idea of private roads, you mentioned today that we are about 30% roadside, according to the statistics that I pulled out of your 2023 reports. We got 1898 units of curbside pickup, and a total number of all units of just under 9,000. So that 30% is about right. What I would offer, though, is that as you and I talked, it's not likely that any more than 30% of the people who are eligible for roadside can actually use it, because they're either not there, they don't have a bare bin, or whatever. And so when I did the math, it looks like you're charging us $203 per unit of curbside. But in fairness, when only 30% of our people are using it, it's really costing us over $600 per roadside, per curbside pickup. And I think those numbers need to be really front and center and visible, because that $600 per roadside person is a very significantly different number than the 200. And then when we add in the points that Councillor Graziano brought forward a few minutes ago, which is people show up with more than 2 bags and they want to get rid of them. And so we've talked about the concept of bag tags and how that might solve the problem. And so I don't have an answer to this somewhat rhetorical question, but it is going down the path of, if we went to a bag tag world, what might the likely charge be to the township to allow people to be given? So right now, your numbers are $386,000 is what it costs for curbside. Would you take that $386,000? Well, probably a third of that, because only a third of the people are using it. So take a third of that and allocate that in bag tags. And is that how the formula would work? And I'm getting complex, and I know that's not a today answer, but I just wanted to throw that kind of concept out there, because I think we need to be thinking about creative ways of getting at fair numbers, and having a guy who, having a road where you have eligible roadside pickup, but only a third of them are using it, and then charging us $600 for the people who use it, I think is a fallacy. It's a fail. So I'll just offer that up as something I think we need to dig into. I actually like the idea of private roadside pickup, if that's something you can do in the future, if the cost per roadside could work. And maybe the bag tag thing solves some of that problem as well. Maybe the guys walk down to the end of the road and put their, anyways, the ideas there. Private bin sites. So we've talked about that. Chris, thank you very much for suggesting it's an expedited process. I've heard that from you before. I'm a little concerned on this financial insurance liability. I know you told me that there is a public-private thing that could be done. I did not follow up yet or connect with the people that you suggested, but for the purposes of this forum, do you have anything that could give us an elevated level of comfort level of how our township might participate in a public-private process to help marinas and others have a private bin site?
Through you, Your Worship. Something that the township can do in order to at least assist initially would be rezoning, because many of the marinas zoning may not allow the establishment of waste transfer stations. So that's a critical step, and the ministry won't accept an application if the municipality hasn't signed off that the proposed use meets the zoning and they're fully aware of the issues. Something that the municipality can also look at in discussions with the District of Muskoka is doing a public-private partnership, having a public bin on private property, and whether entering into lease agreements and those kind of things to see if there's an interest from the marinas in doing that. And then some marinas also can also consider, having a restricted private service for their water access cottagers, where they'll, as charged as part of the slip fee, part of their cost recovery for establishing the transfer station and disposal costs overall. So that's there's a lot of options that you can consider. A majority of them are service level discussions that you can have with Commissioner Steele and yourselves and the Engineering and Public Works Committee as to how you want to service the municipality is really up to the municipality. Whether you want a public-private partnership, that's fine. We'll assist and do consultation around the application process and any questions and so on to help expedite it. And thinking out of the box, I would recommend it. Like, if there's some things that you want to try, then we can discuss. We can certainly discuss them to see if there's any special approvals or exemptions available for that type of activity. But ultimately, the ministry doesn't regulate the level of service provided to residents in a municipality or private industry or anything like that. We regulate the transportation, transfer, processing, and disposal. That's our function under the Environmental Protection Act.
Well, thank you for that. I want to shift back with kind of a final question in this round, if I may. And that is, I can wrap my mind around and understand the concept of a elevated service at a marina where the marina chooses to embrace the need for an ECA and a private site. And then, as we've discussed, the marina staff get trained and certified or whatever to be operators of that private site. And given that marinas in our community generally work extended hours throughout the busy season, that generally solves the need for access for residents. What scares the H out of me is a bin site that is not on private land, that has to have somebody, some employee, maybe a district, maybe a township employee, paid to go and sit there for extended hours. There's no job task sharing like there is at a marina. The guy who looks after opening the gate at the marina and putting the waste in there is going to be doing a million other things. So it's not a dedicated cost. And so what we end up with is we can fairly clearly define what the cost model is at a marina bin site where the marina staff look after things. However, if it's not that, and it's not roadside pickup, then we have an out of control cost model that I would say if the residents who want to use that want to pay for it, that's fine. The residents who want to use a private marina site who want to pay for it, that's fine too. But those are two very different cost models. And I think as we go forward, we need to understand, number one, what are those models? And number two, how do we attach the cost of those models to the users of those models? So back to roadside. If the roadside cost today is 600 because 30% of the people aren't, or 70% of the people can't use it, then maybe we go to a bag tag model where it truly is like a $200 per property cost, and everybody gets bag tags instead. And now you're issuing $200 per eligible or user roadside guy, and that becomes fair. And then those guys who aren't using it, you're not charging us for.
Question in all this?
I'm just saying this is part of the model. We need to understand how that whole thing could work. I think the model of costs and the benefits of who uses that, we've got to figure out how to do that in order for this to be a successful, outcome. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis, did you want to jump into the first round or wait for the second round?
Ditto.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions. First of all, I'm going to disagree with Commissioner Steele. In one part of your response to Councillor Predko, you said anything's possible. Clearly, it's not. That's that's why we're still here, because many of the solutions that we thought were worth trying, you or Mr. Hyde reminds us that, well, actually, they're not allowed. And so I want to talk about what is and is not allowed. And my first question in that regard is, and Mr. Hyde, I admit you were the source of this in a conversation you and I had many years ago. You informed me that it is illegal for an individual to move garbage from one private property to a second private property. And therefore, every marina owner or user who has a cottage, when they go to the marina these days, is breaking the law. Is that correct?
Technically, yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, that technically is, you're going to take us up or down on technicalities. Yeah. Secondly, if I understood you correctly, because yachts are considered, their local address is the yacht haven where they are, they're not breaking that law. So we have a scenario, if I understand it correctly, is I can have a water access cottage. On one side is the cottage owner's boat, and the other side is a visiting yacht. They all bring their groceries, they all make their garbage, they both go back to the marina. And the one side is breaking the law, the other side is not. Secondly, when you go back to the yacht haven, it's being served by a private contractor, one of the carriers who have their licenses, and they've placed bins at the back of that yacht haven. And to the best of my knowledge, they don't have an ECA. The carrier may, but that bin site does not. Meanwhile, the cottage marina have the bins behind their building, and they require an ECA. And so would I be correct in saying that we have a completely separate set of standards for yacht owners and operators versus cottage owners?
Well, it's not that there's a different set of standards. It's the interpretation of the legislation was such that if it's a purely yachting facility where owners come in to their yacht or large boat, go out in Georgian Bay, Lake Huron for the day or weekend, and then come back and leave some of their garbage at the facility, that it wasn't generated on another property. It was brought with them and then brought back with them. If the yachting facility has a mixture of water access cottagers and yachting clients, then they would require an ECA or transfer station.
And I'm willing to bet, and you can correct me, that there's very few marinas in this province that have ECAs.
I would imagine most of them would need an environmental compliance approval if they're providing waste management services to water access cottagers. They should have.
I understand that, but what I'm saying, I'd be curious to how many marinas in the province actually have ECAs.
I have no idea.
No, I suspect very few, but again, I don't know. And the reason I bring this up is I think one of the real challenges we are facing is this, I call it double standard. I believe that the rules and regulations created by the province were created by people who did not imagine such a thing as a water access only residence. I mean, because let's face facts, 99% of the residences in this province, if not more, are road access. So I'm not blaming them, but to me, part of the challenge I think we face is that we need the province to recognize our circumstances here. I mean, if you go to marinas in, pick Midland or Penetang, that have 95% yachters, probably nobody's paid attention to the fact that they have a handful of cottagers also using that marina, because it's not an issue. Nobody would have paid attention to our bins until some bleepity bleep left a container of oil next to a bin half a dozen years ago, or whenever it was. That's the only reason this flag has been raised. And I would like to argue that those two marinas, one serving yachters, one serving cottagers, are relatively equal in their environmental danger, exposure, risk. And yet they have to satisfy very different standards. And to me, that's a real concern, because if I understood it correctly, and correct me, either of you, if I'm wrong in this, I understood that one of the reasons that the Spirit Marina ECA was not exercised was because their lawyers and their insurance company said, get the hell away. There's too much exposure, too much cost involved, and which I can understand. And so that's what disturbs me, is that this insistence on ECAs for some marinas and not others is unfair, impractical, and leading to solutions that may not be as good for the environment. And so, so my question, I had to come to a question eventually, is who should we talk to in the ministry about looking at this inconsistency, looking at the fact that there is a unintended discrimination against water access only residences?
Your Worship, the ministry does have a waste management review committee that looks at issues and concerns through our environmental assessment permissions division and our technical assessment standards development branch. However, There was an initial discussion about the bin site topic because I brought it to them, and they decided not to pursue anything in relation to it because it was just the District of Muskoka. I know I can speak to my experience over in Haliburton County. We have a mixture of road access cottages and water access cottages, and everyone takes their garbage and recycling to the landfill site, whether they're water access or not. And I know from my experience, our local landfill was closed about 20 years ago. Now I drive about 12 kilometers out of the way in the wrong direction on my way home to drop off my garbage and recycling. So, I don't think that it's an unfair treatment of Georgian Bay Township. I think it's modernizing waste management in the District of Muskoka with the goal of environmental protection. We did have incidents in the past in 2018 and 2019 where residents had been dropping off paint, gasoline, oils, batteries, marine batteries, and everything at some of the bin sites. In one case, someone kicked some of these over and they were spilled to the lake, and there was an expensive cleanup. And we've also been a couple of incidents since that where there were fires at the bin sites because no one's there monitoring what people are putting in them. And a lot of them were essentially on the water in some cases. I think you're aware of many of them where the bins were within 2-3 meters of the lake. They had drain holes in them so leachate could leak out of them. And they represented a significant potential risk and great risk of spills or contaminants to the local environment. So I don't believe that there's anyone picking on Georgian Bay Township. I think you are a very unique municipality in Ontario that needs to carefully look at the level of servicing you want to provide to your residents. There are many options that I saw from your brainstorming session that have been piloted in other parts of Muskoka that were successful. I think it's determining the level of service and hours of service that you want to provide to your residents. And that can be fine-tuned over time. I think if you start with a broader level of service and fine-tune it based on your user groups and everything in the location, you'll be able to provide a level of service I think that residents will adjust to. But again, that level of service is for council to discuss and determine what will be best, most cost-effective, whether you go to a bag tag system or a combination of transfer stations, whether they're centrally located or more focused on Honey Harbor area and some of the other large marina area where there's a lot of marinas, a lot of residents coming in. Again, that level of service is up to you. But we being the Ministry of Environment we were very surprised when we found out back in 2018, 2019 that there were 88 unlicensed bin sites across Muskoka. And my first response was, now what do we do? How do we manage this effectively to bring the District of Muskoka into compliance, but also servicing residents and cottagers in Muskoka? So the district staff have been working very hard with the Engineering and Public Works Committee, as you know, Your Worship, and they've come up with a very effective and thorough plan with the bin site transition plan to adjust it. I think, but again, Georgian Bay Township is very unique in Ontario with the large numbers of water access cottagers. So it'll take some creative work to find solutions for your residents.
No, and I'm not suggesting, by the way, that anybody's picking on our township. I think it's unintentional, but there are consequences to the way the current laws are written. We know the township to our north, the archipelago, also has a huge percentage of water access only residents, probably higher as a percentage than what we have, but they have water accessible transfer stations. We do not. The cost of putting those in, I think, would probably be prohibitive at this point, just the acquisition of land, let alone at this point trying to get approval for those. So I'm going to go to Commissioner Steele now. Correct me if I'm wrong, because this I've received word of mouth as opposed to seeing it recorded specifically. My understanding is with the transfer stations that we have, that the cost of managing those transfer stations, and I'm talking specifically about the transportation of the waste from the transfer stations to the landfill, is I'll call it a shared cost between the township and the district.
Thank you. Through you to you, Mr. Chair. The transportation is shared amongst all area municipalities from the transfer stations. The depots are entirely different because they're a customized level of service by municipality.
And there is exactly where I was going. So it costs us more to have a waste depot than a transfer station. So what does it take for us to make a waste depot a transfer station?
Well, Mr. Chair, the transfer stations are distributed across the district to provide a consistent level of service. It would be unreasonable, and certainly anything can be done provided it meets all the Ministry of the Environment regulations. Anything can be done. It's subject to committee and council approval. I would suggest that it would be, I don't want to presuppose what council would decide. I think it would be very challenging to increase the number of transfer stations within the township of Georgian Bay substantially, given the fact that some municipalities have a single transfer station and it is fairly remote. So Huntsville, for example, it has one transfer station that's available to it, and it is not convenient for its residents. Understanding that township of Georgian Bay has a large number of water access property owners, but I think it would be unreasonable, and this is, I'm just suggesting, this is my opinion, to expect that the level of service would be appropriate across the district should the township have more than the 2 transfer stations it has.
Well, I'm thinking that Lake of Bays has 4 transfer stations, and their population and ours are somewhat similar. And that, so I'm not talking about adding 70 transfer stations. I'm talking about adding 1 or 2. And the reason I ask this is because I feel that it's weird and wonderful to think that if we let's for instance use Go Home Lake. Look, Go Home Lake has a couple bin sites. We can imagine, well, just as it's a good example, we can imagine one of the solutions, and perhaps one that you are seriously considering, Commissioner Steele, is a waste depot on that road somewhere to serve all those residents. And I'm thinking calling it a waste depot versus calling it a transfer station means we'll be paying more. So I'd rather call it a transfer station. It doesn't need a scale. Just call it a transfer station, and then we can share those costs with the entire district the same way Lake of Bays does. And what stops that from happening?
So to you, Mr. Chair, I think that's a valid question. I think the answer is transfer stations have scales. And so if it is a transfer station, it will have a scale.
Would a bathroom scale do?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, okay. So then what?
But let me just explain, because I think the part that, you know, it sounds like semantics, but the reality is, the practicality behind it is, the transfer stations are located across the district to provide a consistent level of service across the district. They're serving a district benefit for all residents to come. Depots have been added at the request of area municipalities, and the bylaw is very clear. If it's requested by an area municipality, the costs are borne by the area municipality. It's right in the bylaw. And so I think we would have to work out what that looks like. Whatever committee and council would approve, perhaps, I don't know if I'd be able to recommend it as a staff member, but certainly subject to committee and council decision on what gets implemented.
I just think it's a little bit absurd if we decide to put a transfer station in somewhere between the 2 we have now, and let's say Go Home Lake Road and the 400 neighborhood or something like that. I'm just making one up here, wherever we think it serves the most residents the best. If the district goes through the expense of putting in a waste scale, it'll cost us less, because then it becomes a transfer station. And so to me, we have to, as we go through all this, and you've heard a few other references to cost, we have to look at what's actually the most practical for all of us. And, you know, at the township level, and excuse this political observation for a moment, but at township level, we're conscious of the fact that if we are collecting less than our share of a service, then it's part of the cost goes under the taxation base. And if we require a little extra service than the average in the district, it goes under the rate base. But there's one-way ratcheting going on here, and I'm just trying to get a fair deal and a practical deal. And I think between your costing model of the way the waste depots cost us more than transfer stations, and the provincial model where yachters get a better deal than cottagers, and I'm sorry, that's really what it comes down to at this point. Yachters pay a lot less to get their garbage disposed of than cottagers. Our residents are being shortchanged, and I think that has to be part of our equation to find a solution.
Well, I think, so totally hear what you're saying, and I understand that could be the perception. I think I'll add a couple things if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
That's why we're having the discussion.
The waste levy model was generated over a number of years by district council.
Mhm.
It took a substantial amount of effort to get to where it is
Mhm.
now. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it was the right solve at the time. The one thing that I'll share that that's important, I think is important, is once we complete the solid waste master plan, our plan is to revisit the levy model, given the fact that we're transitioning to producer responsibility, we're transitioning all the dumpster sites, we'll have a better idea of what the nature of waste across Muskoka will hold. And then it would probably be appropriate for council and committee, presumably a waste management levy committee and at the district, similar to what was done, I believe it was 2013 or 2015, certainly well before my time, to revisit how the waste levy is allocated across the municipalities. But that's not for a staff, and I'm just sharing that, that's not for staff to decide. Our job is to abide by the bylaw the way it's set out. And the bylaw says if it's a depot, then it's charged to the area municipality. If it's a transfer station, it's serving a greater population beyond the borders of the area municipality. And it's charged to the general across the district. That's the way the model was agreed upon by council, by district council when it was approved. If there's interest in changing that, then I think we're open as a staff member. I think we're open to taking whatever direction is appropriate from district council. But I think the other, just to go back to the point of transfer station versus depot, the intent through the waste management master plan is to evaluate an appropriate level of service and what those transfer stations would provide. Now, if through the master plan it says, hey, you have a huge gap here and you really should put another depot or transfer station, then that's what we will do over time. But what I think complicates things here is that we don't have that data to make a fulsome decision in the next couple of years. And so my recommendation would be to look at the options that are available that are in the needs and wants study that was produced by the township's consultant, and look at those options and say which ones does the community need. And it doesn't have to be one set of options. It can be a number of them, and as I suggested, the most appropriate way would be to inform council of what those costs are so that you can make a fully informed decision. Or I should say district council and engineering public works committee. And then the decision can be fully informed, taking into account the meetings that you've held, the discussion that happens at district council, the discussion that happened at engineering public works committee. I think those will all be factored into a final decision on the solution for the township of Georgian Bay. Certainly there is an option to do what was in the needs and wants study, but we've heard that there's a concern about cost. What I would say, rough numbers, if we did what was in the needs and wants study, the waste levy would increase by at least 50% for the township of Georgian Bay residents. And so we believe as staff members that it's appropriate to do a detailed analysis of the costs associated with the levels of service that are being requested so that everyone can understand what the impacts are. And really, like I said earlier, and I apologize, I should have said subject to regulatory approval, but you know, any level of service can be achieved provided it meets all the regulations and legislation. But is it really reasonable? Is it financially sustainable? Are residents and taxpayers feeling they're getting value? And I would say at some end of the spectrum, the answer is likely no. And so the intent and you know, my intent and my team's intent is to provide a level of service to the community, not to an individual. And it might sound disrespectful, but that's not the intent. We're a government, we're a municipality. Our job, in my opinion, is to find solutions that's cost effective, but serve the majority of the population. There are always going to be situations where people feel like they're being treated unfairly, because that's the way taxation works. You don't get to choose, I want to be taxed, I don't want to be taxed. And I'm going outside of my realm of expertise, but I think, you know, our approach has been and will be to find a balanced solution that is reasonable from a cost perspective, but also serves the vast majority of the population.
One final question that is perhaps far simpler. You installed at our 2 transfer stations these oversized buried green bin collection devices. Any idea how much volume they're collecting versus the days when you had 2 individual garbage pail sized green bins? I'm just curious, because every time I look inside, it's basically empty.
So thank you for that question. What I would say is we're seeing further uptake of the use of those devices. Certainly, increasing awareness of organics collections across the district has increased the amount of material collected. Last year, we collected 9,000 tons of organic material that did not end up in landfill. I don't have the figure on top of my head on what the comparison was pre-bin and post-bin, but what I can say is there's continued participation in the use of the organics program. We had a visit not too long ago to the transfer station at Rosewarne, and there was a lineup of people ready to dump their green bins into the earth bins that are installed. And so, you know, I think we're seeing positive movement. I know the Township of Georgian Bay has introduced the food cycler and is promoting that. We're also looking at other options. I think we talked about it, perhaps you and I, or definitely talked about it at committee and council, looking at how do we support the community to promote organics transfer, that either they don't have green bin collection or it's not convenient for them. What are the other options for them? And we are going to bring a report to council likely this summer with options, and it'll likely be some sort of rebate program. So folks can choose whatever option works best for them, as opposed to saying you must choose this or you must choose that. That will offer them the opportunity to choose what fits their lifestyle. Some people have come to me and said, why don't you support vermiculture, vermiposters? And so this will allow folks to make those decisions, but also provide them support to promote them to take that step into managing their organics.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to go off in a second round. Councillor Graziani, you're going to lead off the second round.
Sorry, Your Worship, I was daydreaming there of hamsters on a wheel. Here's how I see it, and forgive my bluntness, but I perceive the situation to be somewhat akin to shrinkflation, in that we're getting less convenience for paying either equal or more money. And that's what I keep hearing here today is, you want this, you want the status quo, more. You can't have the status quo, you can't have the status quo, you're going to pay more and more and more. At some point, the boogeyman's going to come out and your constituents are not going to want to have to pay for more. We're being asked, or rather we're being tasked today, or not today rather, but in the next year to make a decision. But we have no data. Absolutely none. And let me draw a parallel here. Our service provider, in a standard normal situation, if I went to a vendor and I said, I want X service, they would give me an invoice. And that invoice would include the line items of everything that I requested. And I would look over that invoice to confirm that I've received that, and I would pay that bill. In the current state, we don't receive an invoice. We've got no data on costs. we got no data on what services can be purchased through the District of Muskoka and what can't be. We've got no data or very little data on ECA compliances, or at least I don't. We have very little data on the percentage of GBT waste versus that of non-GBT waste at our facilities. We have weight scales. Why? If we're not tracking this data to say this is a GBT resident and their weight equals X, and this is a non-GBT resident, their weight equals Y, and the percentage that we actually should be paying for versus that the district should be covering for non-GBT residents, we have none of this data. We don't have any information, and yet we have to make critical decisions for our residents. And I'm quite concerned by this. I mean, I'm an analytical guy. I'm a data guy, and for me to make a decision without it is incredibly frustrating and hard, and we have to be accountable to our residents without any information. I further see this circle happening here between us asking if it's possible and the district saying, well, it could kind of maybe be possible. We got to talk to the MECP. And we ask, and then the response is, yes, it can be possible, but council needs to wish it. And then council says, okay, well, perhaps we want it. We come back to the district and the district's like, well, maybe it's not possible. And again, coming back to the data on what is possible, we don't have this. We don't have any charts here to say, here's the services that we offer, here's what you can choose, here's what you can't choose. We have nothing here. It's just, it's incredible to have experienced this whole process thus far. The environmental protection issue that was discussed earlier, yeah, valid concern from the province. You know, a couple fires, some toxic spills, all valid concerns. And of course, we want to preserve our environment at all costs. But that could be remedied by having a person there. And this is why I'm suspecting that bin sites need to be supervised and have hours, because by doing so, that bin supervisor can A, put out a fire if they're trained for it, or B, see a toxic spill and mitigate it in advance, or someone coming with a battery and saying, no, you can't come here. But what it doesn't do is it also doesn't hinder someone from throwing oil cans in a bear bin in a bag. So it's kind of helpful-ish in a way, but not necessarily likely going to capture all or mitigate all environmental issues. My question, and I have a couple, and this is directed to Mr. Hyde. I, in a former life, used to hire a private garbage contractor to provide me garbage facilities at my industrial unit. And every week or bi-weekly, depending on the cadence that I preferred or purchased, they would come and they would pick up the bin and they would dump it into their truck and put the bin back down. And at the same time, they'd weigh it. These private contractors, how is that going to differ under these new compliance rules? Or do they fall under these new compliance rules?
Through you, Your Worship, the waste management systems, the companies that collect waste from the overhead bins and so on, they're licensed by the ministry. The legislation is very specific that says you collect the waste, you must take it to a ministry licensed facility for disposal, whether it's a transfer station or a landfill site or an energy waste facility. So some of the piloting that the district has done in some of the other municipalities, and I think in Georgian Bay as well, is where they had what I think you call lakeside service, where they brought a garbage truck that can take garbage on one side, recyclable on the other side. Residents drop it off. The truck goes to the transfer station and drops off the waste, drops the garbage at the Rosewarne landfill site, and it's all. It doesn't require any approval for them to be at the marina and residents to drop their garbage in the truck. It's licensed. It's a waste management system, and the waste is considered to be in transit when it's going from the resident's boat or car directly to the truck and then to the disposal facility. It's when the bins hit the ground and that they have to have, then it becomes a transfer facility under the legislation, so it has to have an approval. So the companies that are collecting the waste are already licensed by the ministry, like Mid-Ontario Disposal, Waste Management, Miller Waste, Canadian Waste Services. So they're already licensed to transport waste in Ontario. They don't require any special approval to come to a marina and pick up waste residents dropping off from a boat or so on. So they're already approved. That's in transit movement of waste material.
And forgive me, maybe I should have been a little bit more elaborative on the question. And thank you for the context. My question is more so, do their bins, when they go to a industrial facility and they drop those bins down, require fencing and supervision?
No, they're not, because they're not considered a transfer site and don't require, like at that industrial facility, the waste that's being deposited in the bins is generated on site on that property. And then, so they don't need a waste management, waste disposal site approval for that. Otherwise, there'd be thousands and thousands of them across.
Right, of course. And that's where I'm going with this.
The intention is to where there are locations where waste is being centralized and transfer where there is much higher risk, then it requires an approval where you're bringing in waste from multiple properties. The only exception to that for an industrial property, depending on what the business was you're working for, is if you're generating liquid industrial waste or hazardous waste at your facility, then you have to have specialized storage and bins, and then you have to have, we have a manifesting system to track all of the hazardous waste that is generated and processed and disposed of in Ontario. So it's an extra level of protection for things like hazardous waste.
Understood. So work with me here. In theory, rather than going through an ECA, a marina could simply just hire a contractor such as GFL to drop a couple of bins there, and they're good. They don't need to fence. They don't need to have supervision. They don't need to have surveillance and drones. They're good.
Yeah, they won't need an approval as long as the waste is generated at the marina, like for things like, shrink wrap for boats, other waste from boat cleaning and processing, that kind of stuff, solid non-hazardous waste.
What about their users? What about the users of the marina? Could they just discard garbage there as well?
Who's that, sorry?
The users of the marina, their clients.
If they brought the garbage from another property, no. The marina would need an environmental compliance approval.
But if they brought it from a yacht, they'd be fine. So what would be the difference if they brought it from their boat? So if they went from their property to their boat and they spent 10 minutes on the water, and then they brought it from their boat to is there a difference than what yachts?
The way the legislation works is that if someone's bringing waste generated from another property to another centralized location for collection or disposal, it requires an approval. When we looked at this issue around the yachting centers a few years ago, it was determined that the waste, they're there, they're living on the boat, they go out in the bay, they go out in the lake, and they come back, and then they can drop their waste off there that they generated on the boat. Because a lot of people, as I'm sure as you're aware, that have the large boats, they have barbecues, they have parties on the boats, and the waste generated there is disposed of at the yachting center bins. I'm assuming they're charged a fee or part of the slip fee from the yachting center.
So if the user declared that food or that garbage was generated on their boat, then they would be okay to have a normal bin there. It's just if they were to say that it came from their home, that would be the issue. This is the honor system I'm assuming we're working on here.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting legislation, to say the least. Allow me to ask another question. Thank you. Thank you for that. I understand that there's an issue with indemnification, specifically with the District of Muskoka. Is the district prepared to indemnify marinas if in the event that they opt to put an EC or to go through the ECA process, specifically on spills and so on? So if they, out of the convenience of their customers, agree to go through the process, incur the costs, acquire the insurance, is the district prepared to meet them halfway and say they'll indemnify them, given that this is a service to the district's ratepayers as well?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't answer that question. It's a district council decision. I would say that it would be very rare for the district to indemnify a private property owner for something that they would likely have insurance for or ought to have insurance for. But I'm certainly, I don't think it would be a reasonable solution. Certainly as staff, under no circumstances would that be something that I would recommend.
My last question, if I can. We had spoken on, well, we had identified here today that council can determine the hours of bin sites, transfer stations. It's up to us. We just have to pay for it. In doing so, council passes, let's say for all intents and purposes, a change of hours. Let's say Councillor Predko's suggestion of us having the flexibility to change it real time rather than having to kick back up to our upper tier and requesting permission from our upper tier. And based on what I heard, that permission would have to be requested at every budget interval because the budgeting would have to be put in place for that. So it seems to me like it'd be a 1-year request every year. Come budget, we would have to come to the district and ask if our district would allow us to change these hours. But let's say for all intents and purposes, this would be the case. How fast of a turnaround time do you feel your team could come back to us and say, yes, we approve to change those hours, and we'll go ahead and change the signage and make sure that the contractor who's there supervising now understands the new hours?
Through the chair, it would have to go through the budgeting process. So certainly if there was a request, we would put in a service level change as part of the budget process. It would get approved or not approved as part of the budget, and members of district council are here at Georgian Bay Council. So the answer is when the budget was approved, then we would implement the change. The other part I would caution is changing the hours often can also be problematic, as we've experienced over the last period of time when the site, even though it's signed as closed and folks show up, they don't know that it's closed. And so people are creatures of habit. And so I would be very cautious about changing the hours often. I would believe that it would be appropriate to do a detailed analysis of the changes and how the community would respond. Like I said, we will do what district council directs us, but I would also be very hesitant to change the hours frequently for that reason, that it would be challenging for residents to remember what the actual hours were. And so, Councillor Graziano, thank you for the question. Happy to receive a resolution from the Township of Georgian Bay should they wish. It would go through the normal district process, would be considered at the budget, because the fact is it needs to be funded, and so those hours would have to go into the budget and considered through that budget process and and appropriately applied to the levy.
What if the cumulative hours didn't change, rather just the operational hours did? So let's say for all intents and purposes, you budgeted 150 hours for this week, and we stayed true to that 150 hours, albeit we tweaked the 8 to 5 to 5 to 11. Does that change your budgeting, and would that have to go through your approval process? Because I'd be curious, as part of the data request that we also get, how many hours you've budgeted this year for and what's remaining.
So the data request, all the information is publicly available on the district's website with respect to the hours and service level changes. So that's entirely available as it stands today. If there was an adjustment, a shift from hours, one site to another, or changing the days or such, that can be implemented more at a staff level. But again, I would be very cautious about changing the hours without any data, as you've mentioned, because I think the one thing we want to be cautious about is we're not changing to accommodate 1 or 2 folks and disturbing 10 folks, as an example. And so without having an understanding of the number of people who are asking for the hours, the number of people that are reaching out, and I'll just be frank, I mean, we've received very few contacts from residents in Georgian Bay about not being happy with the hours. I understand that members of council have received them, but the district has received nearly zero. I'll correct that, nearly zero requests for additional hours at the sites. Yes, we do see improper behavior where people are throwing material over the fence because they're not happy. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not very common. And I would just be very cautious about adjusting the hours to accommodate very few folks in the community. If that's the direction that Township Council wishes to go ahead with, then we're happy to consider it and review it. And if we feel it's necessary to present it at District Council, we will do that to get the direction.
And Commissioner Steele,
again,
sorry, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were concluding. Go ahead.
No, I've lost my train of thought. So.
Sorry, I apologize. I thought you were concluding. I was going to say I'm not aware that the total amount of hours that we have that we've purchased or that we've budgeted is, in the public, and perhaps you and I can offline, you can point me in the direction as to where that information is, especially for District Road 33's bin site. With regards to communication, I can appreciate your caution. However, I think the communication, one issue that we've experienced on 33 was that there was absolutely no communication with regards to hours, changes of service levels, what was happening, and so on. We discussed surveying the community. I don't see a survey coming out anytime soon from the district. I don't have a view of your roadmap, so I don't know what you are intending on doing. But as a local ward councillor, I'm pretty confident that I can survey my community to determine what the consensus is, and then make a strong recommendation to this council, and perhaps, hopefully, if this council wills it, move it back to you and say, if we have a total remaining hours for this fiscal year of 18,000, and the hours were essentially, they were approved for these working hours, we can adjust accordingly and come back to you and say, this is the recommendation. Can we implement this quickly? And then do a little bit of a litmus test to see whether or not that works for everybody. That's interesting information. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up because maybe I wasn't clear earlier in the meeting. We have rolled out a "Sorry We Missed You" campaign. There are signs at every Georgian Bay transfer station and depot where if a resident or someone who wanted to drop material off visited the site on an off hour, they have an opportunity to use a QR code to link to a form to let us know when they were there, where they live, what material they were planning on dropping off, and what time was more suitable for them. So that'll be an important data point for us to collect, or a collection of data to inform changes of hours, and that's the intent of the program. I'm happy to share with members of council if after this meeting we have a small postcard size graphic that you can share to constituents if they reach out to you to say, hey, I dropped by the site and it wasn't open when I needed it to. Happy to receive that feedback through the form. That'll be clear data for us to understand if we are meeting the expectations of the residents or if we're not. We have certainly the data on who visits the sites during regular hours because we log all the visits. We log on certainly on the transfer stations through the scales, but at the depots, we also log who visited or the number of visitors to the sites. And so we have the data when the sites are open. This will allow us the ability to track when people are visiting and the sites are not open. And so I think that'll be an important data point to collect. And to your point, it'll allow us to make informed decisions and use database versus perhaps anecdotal feedback.
Yeah, I want one additional follow-up. Thank you. Very, very quickly on that point. On 33, there's a lot of signage on the fence. And so perhaps it may be a prudent exercise to declutter the signage that's there. I don't know whether or not this, sorry, we missed you sign is up yet. I haven't been there today to determine whether it is, but I do know that there's a lot of signage on that fencing, and likely got lost in visual overload or visual stimuli overload. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for all the information. I think there's, I would just like to say a few things. One is that on a per capita basis, the Township of Georgian Bay pays by far the highest waste management and services of any of our 6 municipalities. And that's because we have unusual needs, although I will say this, that our water access community, for example, act as garbage trucks. They pick up their garbage at their cottage, they put it in their boat, they take it down to the marina, they walk up in the marina and put it in the garbage bin. So they're providing a certain service, and there's no free ride there. Or I mean, sorry, that is a free ride, and yet our costs, the hard reality is our costs are the highest in the district on a per capita basis. Isn't that not correct, James?
Thank you. And through you, the chair, absolutely. Georgian Bay Township pays the highest waste levy of any municipality in the district.
Yes, and so we have, for example, a similar township that's about the same size, a little bit less in population at Lake of Bays, and their collection costs are about half of ours. And I realize it's a different situation, but I think it's important to sort of reality check ourselves in terms of cost. And we don't, and that's why since 2014, when I first joined the District of Muskoka Council, I've been trying to get the bottom line on costs. We don't have it. We still don't have it. And from what I can tell, our finance department isn't really in the district, isn't really all that willing to provide that information, other than in very general terms for budgeting, which we can't get our hands around what some of these services cost us. So these are some of the hard realities that we need to sort of understand. And top of which, as a sort of an unusual township in the District 6, the number of times that I've seen votes in favor of the township of Georgian Bay have been few and far between. And it's I don't feel persecuted. It's just the way it is. The towns the three towns basically control the levers, and that's just the reality. So I think it's important to understand that in terms of some of the things that have been talked about here. I think it's important to understand that some things just will not work for us. Lakeside service, nice idea, won't work unless you're going to have a garbage truck sitting there 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. It's not realistic from a water access community perspective. Not going to work. I think it's also important to point out that the marinas that have been referenced here, but in Honey Harbor, are being treated differently than they are in Midland and Penetang, where there are thousands of slips. And some of those thousands are filled by seasonal residents, not just transient boaters. And they get a different treatment. And that ain't fair. So I could talk about Midland and Penetang and Parry Sound, and I could go on and on. And that's a lot of places where we just simply are not getting the same consideration. And I like what the mayor is suggesting, and that is that we perhaps need some better consideration, especially from the province and maybe the ministry. So there's a few other things I heard in our discussions that I won't get into, other than Councillor Hazelton referenced that we use 9,000 units. Well, that's interesting. We only have 5,500 residences. So how do we use 9,000 units? So there we go. Lots of really strange information and very hard to come up with solutions is what I'm saying. And it's not, please don't take this as a personal against you gentlemen. It's not the point. It's that we are unique, and it's a tough one to fix. So there we are. Thank you.
I think you probably know, Councillor Cooper, that the 9,000 comes from the number of lots in the township, not the number of occupied lots. And they've used that standard district-wide. Just so happens we have a higher percentage of unoccupied lots than 4 of the other municipalities.
But don't we pay the freight on that?
Of course, because that was the system created back in 2013 that was voted by the towns.
Well, good luck in getting that changed. And it's absurd.
Councillor Hazelton. Well, Councillor Jarvis, your hand was up. Is it intentionally down?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything that's been said, so I just be repeating myself and expressing significant frustration over the whole process.
Councillor Hazelton.
Frustration, ditto. So I have one specific ask, and you've probably heard it before, but I think you need to hear it again. We can't work with the marinas on putting together a business plan for them until we figure out how to drop back to a bare set of services from which we can then build up to whoever wants to get a more premium service. We desperately need to know what the Baxter Road, Tower Road sites cost us as a township. Just forget about all other services for a second, but you can't talk to the marina about what his business model might look like if we can't get that number. So please, that is absolutely number one, because 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I started the model, I've got the model, I've made assumptions, but if we can't get that number definitively from the district, then we can't have a reasonable discussion with the marina on how to move forward.
Councillor Hazelton, through the chair, heard you loud and clear, and certainly we're already anticipating the types of scenarios we would review as part of the financial analysis in that report later on this summer or early fall. And so certainly take that as feedback as sort of the key, what's the bare minimum level of service, and that will definitely be a scenario that we will do the detailed financial analysis on.
So I appreciate that. I think in the world of sense of urgency, we need to be talking with the marinas over the summer. We need to have not necessarily a 100% number from you about what that bare bones service might be, but we need to have a 90-95% confidence factor that that's likely what it's going to be, so that we can engage with the marinas and find out which ones have an appetite for a private bin site. And I can tell you that I have surveyed several, and even a small one with only about 70 docks is adamant that they want a private bin site that they can control and have available year round. So there are some very interesting dynamics, but we can't have meaningful conversations without the numbers. Thank you.
I got three things, if I can remember them. Going to Councillor Hazelton, I think also what we need to understand is that if these marinas, no, let me rephrase that. I think with the marinas, we're going to have to explore what options are available, how we can afford to put service in marinas that are to some degree privately controlled, that don't fall under the ECA trap where everyone is going to be like Spirit Marine and end up saying, I'm getting the hell out of this because no matter what I do, the province or the legal profession want to skewer us. So I think that we have to look at that. Two questions. One is, we talked about roadside pickup, the truck parks there for the day. What about lakeside pickup using garbage trailers? I mean, like, it doesn't have to be as big a unit as you currently have at the boatworks, but a trailer left on at a marina for a day or a week before it's towed away. If it has wheels under it, would it be approved? No, I knew you were going to say that. But if it has a motor and wheels, it might be.
And if the operator of the vehicle is there.
Okay, so what we have to do is get every marina to buy a truck, and away we go. Okay. Final question. Commissioner Steele. It's 2025. We still haven't given you the perfect solution because there is no such thing. The marinas say there's no way in heck they're going for ECAs. Is your default option, if we do absolutely nothing here, to put in more waste depots for which the township will be fully charged and our rates will go up 50%? Is that the default?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for putting me on the hot seat.
But we need to know.
No, I think it's a fair question, and I apologize. I shouldn't be making light of it. So
we need some levity.
What I would say is, the response, the request came from the township to do what was in the needs and wants study. So that's the direction. That's the request we have from the township now. Now, we're going to look at it. We're going to rationalize it. We will evaluate the options. What we think is reasonably serviced, and certainly the other complicating factor, perhaps, is finding enough sites that will permit a depot to be established. As Chris mentioned, they need to be zoned appropriately. And the costs to find properties to allow the creation of these depots is likely to be prohibitive. That being said, we will do what we have been tasked to do and come up with a strategy. Our plan would be to meet the expectations set out in that study. But can I say that it will be that a year from now? I can't say that for a certainty. Again, it is still also subject to committee and council approval. And so we would make our best recommendation based on our experience of the 56 sites that have already transitioned, many of them on water access. And I think the other important thing to consider, as someone mentioned, I can't recall, I think maybe it was Councillor Cooper, that Lakeside wouldn't work for Township of Georgian Bay. And I won't disagree with him, but I'll share an experience. We have one location where it serves 350 water access property owners, and they have a 3-hour window on a Sunday and a 1-hour window through the week. And there was a lot of concern that that wasn't going to be satisfactory. What we're finding is that everyone's normalized their schedule. They drop off their material during the visits or make other arrangements if that's more convenient for them. And I won't say it's perfect, but it's certainly, as I don't believe it, well, I would say I believe that perhaps having that information might provide some level of comfort if Lakeside was considered for some of the locations. I understand Councillor Hazelton gave me a set of data on the number of slips served, and I think the largest location was 300 slips. And so certainly within the realm of what we're already doing with Lakeside, and it has been successful. It's been in place for 1.5 years now, and we're about to kick off the 2024 season, and it has been relatively well received. Certainly have a few bad actors, but for the most part, the anxiety has alleviated itself.
One question. Average boating time from those water access properties to your lakeside collection point?
So it is an inland lake, so it's certainly not big water like Georgian Bay. So I accept that.
I just wanted to make sure you appreciated
100%,
that.
absolutely.
Because, if it's a 10-minute boat ride, that's different than a 40-minute boat ride.
Agreed.
Not only by half an hour, but by the weather and the waves that you have to go through.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It is different, so it would require a different level of service. Thank you.
All right. I'm going to cut it off now. We've had 2 rounds. We've been at this for 1 hour and 3/4. So I'm going to say thank you very much, gentlemen. Really appreciate you coming and putting up with not only our interrogation, but our editorializing, if I can put it that way. It is a real challenge we face. There's also a significant frustration because we have tried, each one of us individually and as a council as a whole, to come up with solutions where we're normally told, no, the law doesn't allow it, or the budget won't go there, or we'll charge you more than we should. I mean, as I think was Councillor Cooper made the observation, it seems strange that we pay more per capita when we actually bring the garbage to a central location point. The post office found that to be a great way to do things. If they have these super mailboxes, but apparently super garbage boxes cost a heck of a lot more than individual ones, which is absurd from most people's perspective. So it is a challenge that has yet to be solved. It'll never be solved perfectly, but I really am hoping the next couple of years we're going to get closer. And because I do believe that the great majority of our residents want to be responsible in the disposal of their waste. And we have a few bad actors, like in so many other realms, that mess it up for the rest of us. And I hate to think, but the reality is we're in this real mess because some twerp spilled some oil at a roadside pickup bin site. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have been. I mean, Mr. Hyde has made it very clear he had no idea because it was working, and that's part of the frustration. We have a system, in spite of the fact that it's for the purists who say we're not separating well enough and things like that. We had a system that was mostly working for most of our residents. With room for improvement, absolutely. Anyway, with that, again, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate your coming. And I'm going to suggest that we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll continue with the rest of COW and the rest of Planning Council, and we'll see how much we can get done before midnight. Thank you. we're going to get this going again. At this point, Councillors Bocek and Councillor Graziano are not participating. And we have 4 of us for quorum, and Councillor Jarvis we expect back momentarily. Councillor Jarvis is walking the room. So we have 5 councillors moving forward. And we're still in the committee of the whole, and I'm presuming no open forum, because that's the answer I want. So I'm going straight to staff reports. And we have site alteration bylaw amendment for Fire and Emergency Service Department report 24-69. Mr. Bondar, you're sitting there, so you must be giving this report.
Yes, I am.
Before I even look it up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. So yes, today my report is regarding an amendment to the site alteration bylaw in hopes to add administrative penalties and wording for failure to comply with an order. Since I started my position towards the end of 2022, I've been tasked with conducting site alteration enforcement for the township, and I've noticed issues in gaining compliance from some properties due to some of the missing components of the 2014 bylaw. As stated in my report, a summary of the current process that enforcement follows is first, bylaw receives a complaint and conducts a site investigation. For violations, we would then issue a repair order to get a qualified consultant to repair a reclamation plan to bring the property back into compliance. This would be at the task of the property owner to do so. Violators are then summoned to court, and the township seeks a fine, which can be adjusted by the justice of the peace, and the timing sometimes can change based off adjournments and so on. Then the township would then receive the reclamation plan from the property owner, and we as the township pay our township consultant to review this plan to make sure that it hits all the standards that we would require. Any comments made by our consultant are then provided back to the property owner, and then staff, we wait for an addendum to be brought forward. And once that's approved, then they can complete the reclamation work as described in their plan. If at any point, the way the bylaw reads, that they wish to not comply with the repair order, the only option we have right now is that we would organize the reclamation work and put the cost back on the municipal taxes. While clean yards and property standards for minor garbage or grass cutting is fairly simple and it's kind of routine here, we have a couple per year, depending on the year. Site alteration is a much larger work, might constitute us having to do the reclamation work, get the reclamation plan completed and do the full reclamation work. Some are island properties, and it's usually a lot of more than just cutting grass or taking garbage away from the property. So in summary, the current process is costly for the township, and remediation can be dragged out by the property owner, which causes further stress to the environment. On the 2024 planning staff work plan, there is a further review of the site alteration bylaw as a whole, but in the meantime, bylaw staff are looking to make adjustments to help with enforcement of and compliance of this bylaw moving forward. So the first one is, as I mentioned, the addition of administrative penalties, and second is the addition of a failure to comply with an order wording. This wording that would be used in the bylaw is actually one of the recommendations by the Ministry of the Attorney General to be actually implemented into all bylaws, just because it adds a caveat for any staff conducting enforcement to basically have an extra tool to gain that compliance. So with this amendment, in short, the following will be seen. 1, AMPS penalties will avoid these matters being stuck in the court system and being prolonged. 2, as you'll see as part of the report, there is an attachment that shows we're looking for first, second, and third offenses as we did for short-term rentals. This would actually allow us to basically penalize. It could be property owners completing multiple violations, but what we actually see it more as contractors who are completing work on different properties. So if they've been violating on one property and they go to the next and complete the same work, it could be seen as a second offense and a higher fine to that corporation or company. And then the failure to comply with an order penalties creates an enforcement tool and gives the township leverage over offenders who wish to not comply. What also happens, just to kind of summarize, is as of right now, if we summon someone to court, they plead guilty to site alteration, and they don't do the repair order as prescribed in our bylaw. As I mentioned, we would have to do the work. There's no means, and we've talked to our township prosecutor regarding this, to bring them back to court because we don't have that failure to comply with an order portion. So under AMPS, you'll see a first, second, and third offense as well. What the goal would be is that if you don't comply the first time, we would give you X amount of days to comply. If you don't again, and you don't again, we would actually then summons them to the POA court, basically pleading to the justice. We've exhausted our options through our administrative penalty system. We're now seeking a court order to reclamate the property. And then that has much higher leverage basically than our township bylaw repair order. So that's a summary, and open to any questions and further discussion.
I see Councillor Jarvis's hand, so let's go to him.
Yeah, you indicated contractors in that. So let me get this straight. If there's site alteration going on, you go to the contractor or do you go to the property owner?
Depends on the situation. For the most part, first point of contact is the property owner, just because if they're at the property for one, and also based off records that we may have, that's going to be the point of contact. Not all times a contractor is involved with the site alteration. It could be someone as simply just trying to build a patio on their shoreline or bringing in a load of sand. I do have some stats that I'd be willing to share also in regards to how many complaints we receive for site alteration versus how many are actually found violations based off the way the bylaw reads. Some complaints we get most that don't become violations is we have a provision that allows an exemption that would allow for the maintenance of existing. So sometimes people see one truck full of sand that comes in, and that based off a site plan or 2008 aerial image, we can already see that's a pre-existing beach that's there. So that would allow for the maintenance of existing. But if a contractor is involved, that's someone we would be reaching out to make sure that they're held accountable and understand that the violation of the bylaw they.
So do you find, do we see more homeowners or property owners that are in violation on the site plan alteration or contractors?
The way the bylaw reads is that as the property owner, you would be in violation of the bylaw, unless you could prove to us that you can see in this email, I did not want them to place this fill there. But for the way the bylaw reads is to permit the use of and based off the way our prosecutor has stated that wording is as the property owner, even if you didn't deliberately yourself place the sand, you would still be in violation as you're the one who permitted it on your property.
And just really quickly, it's just because you mentioned contractors, not me. So what are contractors usually guilty of then in this situation?
So in regards to the way our bylaw currently reads, it would be the same violation. But the way that the POA court is structured is that contractors can be liable to a larger fine than what a property owner typically is. So for in certain cases, the way the bylaw reads, if I'm not mistaken right now, the minimum for an individual is 500, while the minimum for a contractor is 2,500.
Oh.
Now, I state minimum, but when you go in front of a justice of the peace, those can be changed based off cooperation that
But if we're going to AMPS, it's a different situation entirely. Is that
yes, that's correct. So it would be the same fine across the board. Now, you could see a property owner commit a second or third offense. We haven't seen it here yet, but it's more likely that a contractor working on multiple different properties is the individual that's creating those multitude of offenses.
Right, but if he's working on these properties, it's still the property owner that's responsible, is it not?
Correct, but when it would come to 3 different properties, and usually they're spaced out in a month. So let's say I'm the contractor on one property. It might be the contractor and the property owner who are both responsible on this one property. As we move to someone else's, it might be a first offense for the property owner, but a second offense ticket to the contractor because they have conducted that work previously on a different property.
So we could jointly penalize the property owner and the contractor.
Yeah, if we can prove that the contractor conducted the same work on different properties.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Or CBO was going to add in. Oh, you're not going to tell us how guilty contractors are? Okay. Councillor Predko, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The question with regards to site naturalization. So in a lot of minors variance applications and some other zoning amendments that are approved by council, they've got conditions for naturalization and replanting along the shoreline or different areas to renaturalize the property. And if those plantings die, there's not really an enforcement mechanism, and those types of things aren't covered by site alteration. I'm just wondering if there's any way to add a means of enforcing the preservation of site naturalization. I think it came up the other week that there were some concerns that if we make a condition of a screening or a naturalization and that dies, then the condition that we put on approval of that matter is kind of lost. So how can we incorporate this, or is it something that we want to incorporate?
We're going to go to Director Whitliff.
Thank you. Through the mayor, I think what the Committee of Adjustment will see more of coming forward is the use of minor variance agreements, which essentially becomes a binding contract between the municipality and the landowner. What we envision is taking small security deposits, whether it's $1,000, $3,000, to cover the cost of landscaping, and using that as a means to enforce landscaping. So previously, I think what the committee saw were these requirements simply stated as a condition with the expectation that the landowner would follow through. Now we have a binding agreement, which has a little more weight to it. Of course, agreements always take time and cost to enforce if necessary, but I think it'll ensure we have compliance, and it'll also afford an opportunity for staff to follow up, say, for example, a year later, to ensure plantings are done, because applicants will want their security deposit back.
Right,
Right,
thank you. All right. I think it's only fair, given who asked the questions, and I have moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. It's almost like you knew this was going to happen. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole directs staff to bring a finalized site alteration bylaw amendment for adoption to Council in May 2024. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cooper. Last time I glanced, I didn't see your hand. I apologize.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just getting a little more tricky with my hand work here. Anyway, just briefly, I guess this would be too cumbersome, Derek, but what about some sort of bond, surety bond or whatever? Would that help get this done? In other words, a bond that was $10,000 or $15,000, if you didn't do what you're supposed to do, you pay.
Director Whitlam.
Through the mayor. So, I mentioned a relatively nominal amount, and that's, I think, typical for some of the sort of works we would see captured by a typical situation. But in the case of, if there was substantial restoration work, what we could do is require a cost estimate from a landscaper, the applicant to provide that cost estimate. And then that could form the security amount. If it's a larger amount, let's say it's, I think I heard the figure from Councillor Cooper as an example, $15,000. From the township standpoint, the form of the security, it's unlikely that for an amount of even of that size that an applicant, and I'm going to look perhaps towards our treasurer to secure a bond or a letter of credit. I think they would probably still prefer cash. And from the township standpoint, I think that's perfectly acceptable. So, whether there's other options, I know a guy. Yeah, letters of credit, which I'm more familiar with, are typically reserved for larger amounts. Other means of security, we would have to perhaps discuss that with the treasurer.
That's okay. I just thought I'd throw it out there. I was thinking of a friend of mine across the border, but in terms of bonds, but anyway, I just thought it might be a way of dealing with it, but I'll leave it with you. I just throwing it out as a suggestion. Thank you.
With too many years of experience dealing with letters of credit and bonds, I can tell you cash is greatly preferred.
I'm sure.
So much simpler. I'm going to try again. See no more hands. Okay. Moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole directs staff to bring a finalized site alteration bylaw amendment for adoption by Council in May 2024. And that the Committee of the Whole directs staff to bring an amendment to the AMPS bylaw to Council in May 2024 for the addition of site alteration penalties. And that staff prepare educational infographics and flyers to provide to the public and contractors. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unanimous. Okay. Now we have commercial dock lease rates. Is that you? Okay, to our clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. As everyone's aware, we have a commercial dock slip at the Port of Honey Harbor, and this year we have two interested tour operators looking at using that dock as a drop-off, pickup, stop location, but not overnight parking, as that's not permitted. And they both have other accommodations elsewhere, or slips elsewhere, I should say. We don't have anything in place currently to address agreements or pricing for this, as we haven't had anyone come forward in the past that would be willing to use this space, even though it was one of the hopes in building it in the first place. We also need to update some of our parks and public spaces bylaws to accommodate commercial docks, so we have enforcement mechanisms for other people who may be utilizing that space in their slip, etc. The biggest question, though, that staff have today for committee of the whole is, what is the pricing structure that you would like to see? Staff have done a lot of research and evaluation on what the cost would be associated with having these types of boats. And it's not so much the boat themselves, but it's the people that come with the boat, specifically the washroom facilities and staff maintenance and garbage removal. One of the larger boats could see a built-in cost of approximately $4,000 for the season. However, upon review of what other municipal docks charge, they range in anywhere from like $5,000 to $6,000 per season, and that is for 24/7 dock slippage, bathrooms, electricity, etc., security. So we don't have any of those things to offer, other than we do have bathrooms that are temporary service, and we do have the slip space, but they're looking at like an hour here, an hour there, that kind of thing. So we shouldn't be charging anywhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $6,000. I think $4,000 may be too high as well. Most places charge in some capacity by the foot of the boat. So I have a chart in my report on page 4 that kind of outlines some options of $2, $2.50, $3 is kind of the ballpark area that staff are recommending based off of averages for that type of service that we can provide.
Thank you. So you want us to basically say $2 or $3 or $1 or $0? Okay, council. Do I hear $1? Do I hear $1.50? Make an auction. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'm just going to make the observation that at $2 a foot, that means that the 64-footer is going to be paying us $2,500 for the season. And for that $2,500, they have a reservation for that 80 feet or whatever. I don't know how long that dock is, but that one side of the dock, nobody else can use because they're coming in now and then.
Correct.
What happens if the 64-footer and the 18-footer show up at the same time?
There's two sides to the dock.
So we're going to reserve both sides.
Yes, and the agreement would take into consideration the days and times, so we would try to ensure that there isn't an overlap.
Okay. All right, council. Any thoughts on how much we should charge?
Do we,
Councillor Penco. Yes, we do want to hear what your suggestion.
I guess, do we have commercial comparators? That's really, I mean, I know we have commercial comparators, but I guess beyond Honey Harbor, so we just looked at Honey Harbor areas.
No, we looked at municipalities that are on Jordan Bay.
So we didn't look at the private operators
No,
of commercial docks.
not ones that have the giant tour operators out of them.
Okay. I guess that's a pretty big boat. Okay. Thank you.
Hazelton and Councillor Jarvis, followed by Councillor Jarvis.
Do we know what the costs to the township would be for any maintenance required for the boats being there?
Maintenance to the dock, or just, so the high-end cost, and this was conversations that I had with Brad and his staff. He's gonna be like, why are you looking at me? It's in regards, so there's already a cost to have the bathroom there, which I believe was $25,000 for the season, but that's already there to service the community. We did have to upgrade the holding tank associated with that in order to accommodate the volume of people anticipated. With that, hopefully we've decreased the number of pump outs. So the pump outs is really what causes the extra weekly cost. And so hopefully we've been able to kind of keep that on par. Worst case scenario, if we had to send the staff to clean before and after and the extra pump outs, we were looking at worst case scenario 4,000, but with the addition of the extra holding tank, we're confident it'll be less than that. But again, it's one of those things is we don't know what that volume is going to look like until we live through a season.
So in the world of build it and they will come, we built it and they never came, but they might want to come. My recommendation is tell people it's a very preliminary introductory offer, $2, start the thing, see if you can generate allow people to generate a business from it, and then they will come. But right now nobody's coming, so let's start off, but tell people up front, this is not the permanent number, this is the preliminary number, and depending on how it goes, we'll revisit it next year.
Councilor Jarvis.
Ditto. I was,
Yeah. I'm also a ditto on this one.
no, I was just going to suggest that that larger vessel is likely to have its own facilities on board. I don't think the smaller one, based on what I've seen, would have anything. So I think it'll be interesting to see how things transpire, but just something to be considered in that process. But yeah, I agree. Go with it's a promotional offer. See how it works.
Councilor Hazelton.
One other comment, it's a 100-foot dock. I can't understand why you couldn't have both the 64-foot dock and the 18-foot dock, or 18, sorry, boats on the same side. They're probably professional operators. So let's not tie up the whole dock either side. Let's just preferably, I think, on the inside, which would be a preferred location, I think. But I'll leave it up to staff.
Yes, because obviously it's going to have to be signed.
Yes.
This segment is reserved.
Yes.
Okay, I'm hearing nothing else, so I'm going to say moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole recommends a lease rate of $2 per foot per day per season, and that the Committee of the Whole, I wonder if instead of per season, should we just say for 2024? Okay. And just to make sure, again, I'm a little bit confused here. This is $2 per foot per day?
Correct. That's kind of the mechanism that is used at other municipal docks. Because for us, they're not there every day. So we know one will only be there 2 days per week.
So that means that 64-footer is going to pay $125 each time, or $128 each time they dock, in effect.
I will trust you. Yes.
Well, 64
Yes.
plus 64 is roughly 128, give or take. And we have an accountant in the room. Okay, so be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole recommends a lease rate of $2 per foot per day for 2024, and that the Committee of the Whole approves in principle the commercial boat operator service agreement as presented, and that the necessary bylaws be brought forward to implement the lease rate. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you, unanimously.
Mr. Mayor?
CEO Mariotti.
Yeah, I just wanted to put a positive spin on the on the dock, because as you know, we just came out of COVID, so 2023 was the first full year where 2023 was the first full year that we actually came out of COVID and people started coming out, and guess what? We had Rock the Dock, and it was very popular. And with the Honeybee Festival, we used that full stretch there for showcasing various local arts and crafts. And this year, Rock the Dock is only going to get bigger, and staff have worked diligently to attract these boats to come into the Honey Harbor, which in itself is bringing more visitors. So I think we've built it. and people are coming, partly thanks to the hard effort of staff. So I think we do need to be positive sometimes in some of these things, and I think staff will appreciate that and will create more impetus for us to do even better.
I agree. Okay. That means we're on to monthly department highlights. And sorry? So I'm going to leave it up to staff to tell us what they want to highlight or not, based on the, 40 pages that we were given of detail. I guess alphabetically you're first, Ms. Nicholson. Well, I don't know how we wanted it. It's alphabetically by department. Oh, sorry. So you work in building with a B.
Always number one.
I'm sure that's not what I said.
I know. Anyways, as you can lovely see on the report that was provided, it gives you a comparison between the months for March of 2023 and 2024. It also shows you permits issued in that month, as well as year to date, as well as the outstanding values. Now, obviously, this report is to the date of March 22nd, so all these numbers have increased. You can also see that we had conducted 68 inspections, which I'm sure by the end of March, it was probably closer to 90. And then you can see the monthly things we have been working on outside of our regular daily duties. Most of all, what we've been doing a lot, and when I say we, mostly Dave Fedori, since he's been back, is pursuing a lot of our outstanding issues. And kind of these are all our order to comply, stop work orders, and that, and trying to gain compliance, or basically setting up their court dates to gain compliance. So that, as well as where I was going to go actually on the same path that Josh was going, is contractors for us can be charged as well. Because whether the homeowner has hired them to do the work or not, they're still doing the work. If it's illegal, it's illegal. So everybody's responsible. So that's kind of where we're going with that. And for us as well, contractors can be sometimes held more responsible, especially if they're a corporation. Other than that, we finished a few things. We're still trying to finish up on a few guides that we're providing. One of the more popular ones will be a deck guide that's going to make it easy for people to fill out who are applying for a deck permit. So everything will be provided for them, including a drawing that they can fill out the information. It might help some people, with smaller projects.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Yes. I'm delighted with my already providing statistics up to March 22, 2025.
Microphone.
It's okay. That wasn't for you.
Gee.
What I'm seriously wanting to know, though, is your insights into the reduction in construction value and the lack of commercial construction value. I'm just wondering, what do you think has driven that change?
Well, I can tell you the construction value actually was up about almost $7.5 million at the end of the month. So it's changed from the report. So it's a little closer to 2023, not there. Economy, really, in the end, I know a lot of the contractors, even that I was speaking to at the end of last year, were noticing a lot of things were starting to slow down. But they all do have projects booked in for this year, but it's not, I don't think they had a lot of people knocking on their door like they have in the past years, in the COVID years, as we like to call it. So I'm expecting a turn down, and some of that value could also be in prices coming down as well. because a lot of our stuff is based on the construction value that they put on the application. So that's what market value costing.
Thank you.
Thank you. After B comes CAO.
Well, mine is it's pretty brief. I mean, I get busy with a lot of different files, but I figured I picked the kind of main three ones for the month. And the first one, I'm really happy to say that affordable housing is gaining momentum again, which is it's a multi-stakeholder partnership. And through the mayor's conversation with Chair Lehman at the district is fully aware of this potential opportunity for us to create affordable housing in MacTier and I'm sure other places possibly within the township. But Ms. Schneier is on that housing task force together with Councillor Graziano, I believe, to really push this topic forward. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some movement there. Solid waste, we had a very good discussion today on that. Very appreciative for Commissioner Steele and Mr. Hyde from the MECP showing up to answer some questions. And I know that the district will be providing 2 or 3 options with some broad costing for council to review in the not too distant future. And last but not least, on the OPP detachment boards, again, I'm happy to say that both the Bracebridge and the Southern Georgian Bay detachments agree to, in principle, redefine the boundary for Georgian Bay Township and have us be covered under one detachment. That is being pushed up the flagpole to gain formal approval. But again, there is some positivity on that front to try and bring us under one detachment. So, which in turn means one detachment board. That's it for me.
Councillor Jarvis.
Which detachment board?
That we don't know yet.
Do we have any inkling? I mean, it seems to me that the Southern Georgian Bay makes more sense because they're the ones with the boats, right?
It really is totally under the purview of the OPP.
Yeah, okay. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
that's fair.
That's all I can say right now.
I think the observation has been made that even if Bracebridge were to serve all our land and inland lakes, they do not have the ability to serve Georgian Bay, and that's a significant portion of the police services we require, and therefore there's a certain logic to Southern Georgian Bay. But this is a up the flagpole, semi-political decision.
You know how political decisions go. Okay.
If I can maybe add that you may have heard Inspector Pittman yesterday asking for potential office space, if that might be a hint. So I'll be talking with staff this week to try and identify some space not only here but in MacTier where we can house an officer, irrespective of where this goes. But I think it's good to have someone located in our township anyway to do that paperwork.
But those are 2 different detachments.
Yes, at this time. Councillor Cooper.
I think you answered my question, Mayor, that we've made our case, so to speak, to a certain extent, and logic hopefully would make it the Southern Georgian Bay one, but let's see where it goes. And worst case scenario, we can always recoup our losses by very high rents in MacTier and Township of Georgian Bay, right, Greg? Just kidding.
I will comment that both detachment commanders have been very cooperative in this inquiry, and so with both of them recognizing that one will end up with the responsibility of the township and one will not if a decision is made to put us under only one detachment. But they've both been very helpful and cooperative, and which we greatly appreciate. All right. in our strange and wonderful alphabet, we go to another C, corporate services and clerks. That starts with C as well.
It does. Just going to touch on a couple of things. So we issued or submitted our annual report to the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. As the license holder for the McTier Union Cemetery, we're required to do annual reporting. So that was our 2023 report. We are now able to issue marriage licenses, and we
I'm already married.
and we have scheduled our first ceremony for later this spring, and I think we'll be issuing our first license this week by the sounds of it. So we're really excited about the service that our residents are already taking us up on. So that's really the highlights for us.
Derry mentioned that a few years back, I got one of those, by email licenses to perform marriages for a niece of mine. And so if anybody needs the ceremony done, I'm willing to practice on them. just mentioning this. I could wear a chain while I do it too. Sorry, I'm way off. Councillor Jarvis, you're going to bring this conversation back in line?
I've totally lost my train of thought. Thank you very much. Yes, to the clerk. The only cemetery, open, closed, whatever, in our municipality is that one in McTier, correct? To our knowledge. Do we have any closed cemeteries that we're looking after?
That we are
Cemeteries.
responsible for, no.
No,
I don't
okay.
know offhand. I think there might be one or two. I don't know.
Moose Deer Point has a cemetery that's on the Tabnack property.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, it's just that the was on the news recently that Bracebridge or Huntsville, one of them is appealed to the provincial government for assistance in looking after a number of cemeteries that have been left to them to look after by churches that have closed. And that could be a significant financial burden. I don't see that happening here, but I thought I'd ask anyway. Thanks.
That's actually a significant problem across the province right now because by default, municipalities have to take them on. And usually they're not defaulted out of, upstanding running cemeteries. Usually they run out of funds and don't have and then there's no care maintenance fund.
Councillor Predko.
Also a comment on the Bereavement Authority of Ontario section of this report. I was made aware that in Ontario, green or natural burials is gaining popularity, and if we're in this business, it might be something that could not only make it a simpler process for burials in the future, but also might be more of a niche opportunity, that if this is an area that the township wants to pursue more aggressively, that's maybe an easy win.
And we won't mention how many times ashes have been spread without the appropriate permits. Okay, moving on down the alphabet, I get into F, financial services, and I for IT.
Thank you, Mayor Coutier, and through you to members of council. So I've made it through 3 full weeks. This is my 4th week. And I'm diving in. So development charges, they are well underway. We've been working with Hempson, and I believe council was presented to on March 28th. We are expecting to post later on this month a statutory public meeting for May the 13th, and hoping to pass the bylaw for January 3rd as the DC does expire on June the 10th of this year. In addition, staff are working diligently to close our year end for 2023. We are fairly close. I've been in contact with our auditors as well, and we do hope that by the end of May, we do have our auditors in to finalize, and that way I can come back to council with a status of where we are for year end. And lastly, information technology. We do continue to update our internal systems using TownSuite. We are currently in the process of updating our payroll module, as well as our work order module. And one of items to note is there was a cybersecurity incident you may have heard about in the news with one of our neighboring municipalities. And as a result of that, we Mark Jones, our IT analyst, has been working with our vendor to ensure all of our assets are safeguarded and that we do have the proper internal controls in place. In addition, we are working on additional training for staff as well for cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm impressed how you kept going smoothly in spite of the thunder overhead. But I think, council, we should take a hint. That thunder is saying that between yesterday and today, we've been at this far too long. I think I got to crack down. So Councillor Hazelton, if you're putting your hand up,
No, I'm not.
then why is your mic on?
Because I like the ability of speaking whenever I want to.
All right. We go from F to F, Fire and Emergency Services and Bylaw. Not here. Okay. We got a report also all the tickets and bylaw admin, which is always interesting. Then okay. Human resources. Ms. Buchanan.
Okay, so we'll bypass Tony and go to HR.
Well, I don't see him.
No, but that's okay. Okay, so Nancy and I attended a payroll module kickoff meeting with TownSuite's project manager last month. So they're going to begin testing of 2 previous pay periods, and my hope is that we can get the payroll module up sooner rather than later. As for recruitment, we've hired Jillian Forbes as the Senior Municipal Law Enforcement Officer. We've also wrapped up recruitment for the planning technician. So we actually selected an internal employee, Denise Gushma, was a successful applicant for that. So we're beginning the transition process from finance to planning. I also participated in fire captain interviews and assisted the library with interviews for their new position, the community engagement and programming position. And then at the time that I wrote this report, we had filled all summer student recruitment positions. Unfortunately, we've had to repost the business administrative assistant summer position. That position will work with our clerk's department from May 13th to August 30th. The job posting is still open until next Wednesday, April 17th. So I encourage you or any students out there to please look at our posting, give me a call if you want some more information. Yeah, so we'll hopefully get that wrapped up soon. And then just finally, we hosted a joint health and safety committee meeting last month. We worked with the fire department to follow up with some volunteer firefighters regarding their attendance levels. And we attended a couple meetings with the employee engagement team to review the employee engagement survey results from November 2023. And that's it for me.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Jarvis.
Really quickly, and maybe this would be more for Tony than you, but how serious a problem is it with volunteer firefighters not meeting minimum requirements? Is that a big issue, or we just have a couple that are?
I wouldn't say it's a big issue. It's only a couple. We're pretty lenient when it comes to attendance levels, to be honest. They do have a standard operating procedure in in fire, which states essentially that their attendance has to meet the requirements of the fire chief. So I think we're pretty lenient. But then again, if we have volunteer firefighters who haven't attended, training, truck checks, or emergency calls for a number of months, then we're concerned, and we just want to follow up to make sure they still are interested and want to remain on the department. So
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Operations department. We're down to O.
Thank you, Your Worship. A lot has happened since I submitted the report, so I will be going off script a little bit. First, we have we're trying out a AI generated road patrolling piece of software and hardware. We have it for 6 months at no charge, no commitment. I'm glad we have it for 6 months because there has been quite a bit of user error. So we're working on that. The really big excitement though in our department is we have hired a rec supervisor who has started. His name is Graham Parsons. He came from the city of Toronto. He is very focused on safety, on SOPs, and on procedures. So he is just going through his HR training right now, and then he will be getting oriented. Made one mistake today. He parked in Vivian's parking spot. But we have explained that to him, and he's assured us it won't happen again. I have been in, I have received, I should say, the preliminary design for the Tickner development. I have reviewed it. It just came in. I have a meeting with a consultant in 2 weeks, I believe, to go over it. Some of the things they're proposing seem quite expensive, so I'm trying to get this down to something reasonable, since if it does proceed, it might be funded by the taxpayers. We've also discussed Leduc, the drainage at Leduc Lane, and they are working on that. The drainage solution there involves going through some lands that are owned by OBD, which is kind of handy because they have to do work as well to service their development. That is similar to what we need, and hopefully there can be some shared costs, but we'll see how that develops. The Honey Harbor water system, which I told you would be open on April 15th, will not be open on April 15th. It's just being recommissioned right now. So once it's recommissioned, hopefully in the next week or two, it will be open. So it's not a big delay. It's just, and it's not us, it's the school board. And we had a meeting of the district road supervisors just to discuss our joint needs and concerns and capital and whatnot. Thank you.
Thank you. After O comes P for planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the month of March, planning applications are up compared to March of last year, and we're also up for the year in total compared to the same time last year. The significant bulk, quite frankly, all of the bulk of the day-to-day planning application work is conducted under the supervision of Deb McCabe and our three planners, Jeff, Andrew, and Shania. They're processing those consent minor variance applications, which form the majority of them. But in their spare time, they've also undertaken a number of improvements. So process-wise, Shania has completed updating our application forms to be fillable PDF documents available online and complying with the current legislation. Deb's implemented a weekly rotation schedule among our planning staff, which works really well from a customer service standpoint, so that there's always a planner available to take calls and emails and provide counter service to walk-in customers. Jeff Kratke has been working with our solicitor. We finalized our consent agreement template as part of our ongoing work to standardize and modernize our various agreements. And we've started on the next one, which is a site plan agreement template. As you may have guessed from this morning's public meeting, Jeff has also spent a great deal of time in March on the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications for 117 Port Severn Road. He's done a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes, coordinating the information, the studies, getting it out for peer review, and coordinating with the applicants to get things in a state where it's ready to present for public meeting purposes today. Moving on, number of Oak Bay related items. Jeff has also been working on the Oak Bay Twin Island zoning bylaw amendment, whereas I've been working with Oak Bay and their development team, conducting bi-weekly meetings on their various phases and developments, moving them closer to their respective finish lines. Marina Towns is the one closest to the finish line, and probably next we'll probably see Summerside and a couple other details. I've also been working on Edgewater Estates. That one we're just about to dot the i's and cross the t's and see that 22 unit condominium development just down the road here ready for registration. Beyond that, there's been in the interest of the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment or updates rather, we've created electronic working versions of these documents. And the importance of those is that they're sort of an ongoing working document where we can make our notes sort of electronically right in the margins, so to speak, about things that need to be fixed, improved, changed. And that's going to be really helpful as we get formally into that process. We've also participated in a couple of information meetings, both with the district and the Ministry of Transportation. Both of those partners have implemented new planning submission software programs. So we've been trained on those. And that's the summary. Oh, and I just wanted to, for council's information, during the month of March, we celebrated the 1-year work anniversaries for Jeff Kratke, Deb McCabe, and Shania Wanfor here at the township. Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. Where are we going? We're going to Councillor Jarvis, please.
One, I appreciate all the zoning, et cetera, that you guys have to deal with, you know, Bay, among other places, and I'm glad you're doing it, not me. From the standpoint of Committee of Adjustment, we've been extremely busy. My fellow councillors, I think, will agree, based on all the work that you guys have been doing. I'm just curious to know if you can anticipate how things are going to be going as we move through the year. We've seemed to have got caught up, if I can put it that way, in the application department, particularly from a Committee of Adjustment standpoint, from what I hear. But are we going to be seeing comparable levels of activity at the committee level going down the road, or do you not want to forecast that?
Through the mayor, certainly we are caught up. Again, compared to last year, all our numbers are up, so I can only expect that will continue. We're entering into the season where we expect our application numbers to increase as people start coming up and putting their minds to projects now that the snow has receded.
Especially now that we hear, according to our CBO, that the contractors are looking for work. Okay, or maybe I misunderstood. Sorry.
I really appreciate the work that's being done there. Appreciate it right across the board.
Councillor Cooper, please.
Yes, thanks for all the reports. And Derek, just a quick question. You referenced the review of the official plan and zoning bylaws. What initiatives have been taking place to contact the communities that have community plans, the associations that have, I guess, community plans? What sort of contact has gone on there to make sure there's a smooth transition with that community?
Through the mayor, so to Councillor Cooper, nothing formal yet. The next step in that process is going to be a staff report coming to council, sort of sketching out what staff, through the various discussions we have had to date with members of council and representatives of the communities, our understanding of what sort of the issues are. And that also is going to be derived from the work plan items as well. So present that to council and get council input on that. That would provide the basis in terms of setting out the terms of reference. I would go out in an RFP and to seek a consultant to assist us in that regard. And what we anticipate is that RFP is going to, among other things, outline a very exhaustive, no, that's not the right adjective, a very thorough, thank you, consultation process for the entire community, and of course the various associations which have their own dedicated chapters in the official plan. So more to come in that regard, but certainly the message is loud and clear. that significant consultation is necessary in order to make sure we get this right.
All right, thank you very much. Sustainability, Ms. Schneier. Convenient that sustainability and Schneier both have S.
Yeah, yeah. I used to be Sustainable Severn Sound. Thank you, Chair Coutier and members of Committee of the Whole. So this is an interesting month. Definitely Earth Day is a priority for us at a staff level. I know that the Social Committee is thinking of doing something for Earth Day. We have some outside events, and then municipally, we are hosting an event at Rendezvous Park on April 22nd. I had sent you guys the save the date last month, and so that's now this month, and we would love to have you there. The theme of the entire presentation and education and programming for Earth Day is about turtles. So you'll be able to get access to a turtle box, how to make a turtle box, as well as get information about what to do if you find a turtle. I know that in 2024, we are really pushing for a stronger commitment from the biosphere to help assist with turtles that are found in this area. So this is a start of the pickup of that. When the weather permits, we will be opening up the pickleball courts. There is lots of chatter on our social medias about it. As of right now, we will not be taking any bookings until it becomes a problem or a challenge, and Brad and I will be watching and monitoring that. Yesterday, you approved the RFP for pickleball courts for Tailored Pickleball Academy, and so they have been advised, and their next steps are to come together with us to make a contract. You've heard about the Port of Honey Harbor and that Landmark Cruises is coming to town. It's very exciting. We are definitely looking forward to the uptake in the municipal space of Honey Harbor, and we'll see how that goes. Of particular interest to Councillor Graziano because it was his interest in the RFP, but we did put out an RFP for e-bikes, and we have not heard back from anybody on that RFP. So we've reached out to a couple of vendors and are working specifically with one to see if there's an appetite for 2024 for summer. We've kind of extended our language to not only include e-bikes, but also scooters because they're very popular, especially for transitioning from the Port of Honey Harbor to the pickleball courts, and they would be less infrastructure space for the municipality. So we're working through that. If I had a moment, I would probably spend it discussing with you the municipal accommodation tax that we are bringing forward in 2024. It looks like we're probably going to bring as much as we can in May to finalize it for June so that we can start collecting when the short-term rental registrations are official for July. One of the requirements is that 50% of the money that the municipality collects must go to a tourism destination marketing organization. We have reached out to our preferred destination, DMO, we'll call them, and they have said that they don't want any part of this because they are more of a provincial advocate. And the next agency that we would work with would be Muskoka Tourism. Over the tenure that I have been here, I have not seen a really great relationship with Muskoka Tourism in the township of Georgian Bay. I think the decision to come to Georgian Bay and the 400 happens way back down in Barrie when you decide to go straight or up over the bridge. So I would prefer to work with an agencies that are along the 400 corridor, to which I will be presenting to you a plan to bring the Georgian Bay Biosphere in as a destination marketing organization for a clear and obvious environmental tourism / sustainable tourism initiatives here in the township, and then 15% of that 50% would go to the Seg Bay Chamber, which would be more involved with marketing and promotion and working with our business communities. So I have had early discussions with both agencies, and it seems to be palatable for us, and that's where we're headed, and we'll bring it forward next month.
Okay.
And then there's just a couple of the comments here about Townfolio, which I left you a link. You can check out the data that's provided by Stats Canada on our Townfolio, and then we later supplement that data with content in our community profile. And happy to say that the MECP wetlands grant is complete.
Thank you. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just thank you, Ms. Schneier, for the report. Quick questions about the MAT tax, and my questions are around is the township, and not from the sustainability department side so much as operationally prepared for receiving money and helping these short-term rental operators navigate through their obligations to collect and remit this this tax. So I know in some applications like Airbnb, the host can set up an additional collection tax to be collected. Do we just have a process in place that's simple for people to remit and get confirmation that they remitted the correct amount? And do we have a sense of how onerous this is going to be on township staff?
We don't know how demanding this will be on township staff. It is very hopeful that they'll be able to remit and pay through the e-services portal. And teaching short-term rental operators to understand what needs to be remitted and how to remit it will likely be through public education forums, webinars, as well as content that would be available online so that residents and hosts can see the information that they need to see at their convenience. So a whole education component will be going forward for all of this.
And
let's not get into a lengthy discussion about MAT tax.
No,
she did say a report's coming forward in May.
And I was just going to ask if we have any indication of the compliance for people registering their short-term rentals so far this year.
Tony would be best to speak to that. We have seen several sustainability plans come across our desks, so we're very excited about that, but I don't know the final tally of people that have registered.
Thank you.
I don't know if the fire chief wants to comment.
Well, interestingly enough, the fire chief has run and just arrived, and we're going to go back. We're going to go back in the alphabet up to F in fire services. But perhaps Chief Van Dam, you might want to update us on the registration levels for short-term rentals. But wait, sorry, I just got to confirm. Nobody else has any questions for Ms. Schneier. We can let her off the hook for now. All right, over to you, Chief.
I can tell you that I know that the first 6 are completed. Going through, we found some.
See, I'm still back at the fire. So I believe that we've got 6 that are complete. 2 of them, I believe, have paid their fees already. So they're totally complete. Some of the issues that we found, advertising for 4 bedrooms when they only have 3 bedrooms. So everything that we were concerned about, we've now starting to see how it is. The general intake from most of the people coming forward at this point has been very good, working with them. So it's a slow process to get them going, but hopefully that'll pick up. There's 217 short-term rentals on the websites to date. And we have now started to contact those people. If they haven't voluntarily come forward and started the process, we are now sending them a letter to get them to start that process. So short-term rentals has been slow, but now that everything is in place, we're starting to kick up and be in contact with them. So it's been a positive piece. Where are we? So, senior bylaw officer's position was filled. Jillian Forbes started with us last week. The Animal Control Bylaw Council got to see yesterday. doing some research with Karen on the bylaw of municipal-owned docks. I can tell council that we've had one individual who has been staying at the docks for a substantiated period of time that has now been dealt with. And the individual's boat is now gone. Setting up the website for the AMPS bylaw is now, I believe it's complete. I'm not 100%, but I believe it is complete now. They were working on it. The site alteration bylaw, you got to see it a few minutes ago. So you can tell that it's been exhausting the last little while, but it says there 12 letters sent to short-term rentals. I can tell you that that number is growing quickly now. So, yeah, if there's anything there, you can see what we've been working on. One of the biggest ones going forward right now is the ARIS agreement with the Ministry of Transportation, so that we are able to deny people license plates if they don't pay their AMP fine. So that is in process, working with IT now to provide the MTO with our security for our IT department. So that should be hopefully done in the next short little while. As for fire department, we're continuing on our training. Certification is going fairly well. Our call volume was at 49 at the beginning of the month, and last year was at 42. Keeping in mind that last year was a record year, so I'm not liking where we're going right now, but hopefully we'll be able to put a slow down to that shortly. Pump 3 and all that, all the safety inspections are all done on our trucks. So Marine 1 is back in the water to respond to medical calls. However, the pump in it is still being fitted. The new pump that was going in it is being fitted as we speak. And pump 4 is the hard cover now has been placed on the boat, and it's waiting for the fire chief to go up there and accept it. So when we get some time.
All right, well, thank you very much. Or have you paused or stopped?
Now you can carry it.
Okay.
You guys want to go home too?
Oh, we got much more to go through. Councillor Jarvis.
Just a quick one, Chief, under bylaw enforcement stats, what's 9/11 sign request?
So if somebody requests the 911 addressing signs, that's
okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Falls under Josh's portfolio that he addresses it, make sure it has the right assigned number, and then goes.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. Before I read the motion, I'm going to ask a question of council and our CAO. Not that we have to, I don't want any discussion on it today, but I'm just wondering going forward, these monthly reports, whether we should take a consent agenda approach. In other words, provide the information, and then we'll give everybody an opportunity to ask questions instead of making everybody present reports that we are free to read. So I think it's something we should contemplate going forward. Okay. I have moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Hazelton. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole receives a report regarding March 2024 monthly department highlights for information. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. I believe the item left on our agenda is new business working groups discussion, or do we have more than that? Okay, but before we get to that, moved by Councillor Cooper, seconded by Councillor Hazelton. Be it resolved that council extends the meeting past 4:30, but no later than 6 p.m. And I guess this is just for our Committee of the Whole, because we'll have to do this all over again for planning. Okay. All those in favor? All right, we're going past 4:30 if necessary in Committee of the Whole meeting. But am I correct? There's no other than this? Because the other additions were in the other meeting, right? Okay. Working groups. Councillor Cooper. Our agenda includes 9 pages on working groups. Introduce and please, as with your introduction, please let us know what it is you're hoping to achieve with our conversation.
I'd be happy to do that. And if you read the follow-up email that I sent to you all, I did a very brief summary. I provided a lot of information to Karen that, ended up in the agenda, but really, if you read the email that I sent to you, it's pretty straightforward. And it's really just, my objective is to have the language just changed somewhat to better reflect what a working group can do for us in the township. And so that's, I did some work in terms of checking out working groups, both municipally, provincially, federally. They're quite commonly used, and they're usually on a project basis as opposed to an ongoing committee. And they can operate, I would say, more efficiently in a way and not take up a lot of staff time. I had a conversation with our CAO yesterday and talked about the number of reports that our staff have to put together and a variety of other things that take up so much time. The working group would actually be, I think, very helpful to take on some, small projects along the way. An example of sort of a working group was when I pulled together a group of people to work on how community plans were established and formed last year. And that would be I called it an ad hoc committee, but it was like a working group. So I just wanted to give you an example of something that we've used recently, that we provided a report to council, and then council can decide what to do with any of the findings if they so choose. So that's really what a working group does. And I'm just sending this information to you in a very sort of succinct way in a message I sent out on Thursday. If you'd like me to read it, I can, but if you have read it, is everybody familiar with what a working group can do? Any?
Yeah, my immediate response is, when I look at our committee terms of reference, there's 4 paragraphs on working groups, and I think the 3rd paragraph is reasonably consistent with what you wrote, Councillor Cooper. The 3rd paragraph in that committee terms of reference says working groups are to be informal and encourage open dialogue amongst those in attendance, which may include members of council, staff, industry members, and or relevant stakeholders. This is to ensure community feedback is received.
Yes, I think that's true. I guess what I see the advantage in that it doesn't, most working groups, and why I'm bringing this forward, are not really required to be as formal as a committee. And so using up less staff time, but also example would be, setting an agenda. Does the working group need to take up the clerk's department's time doing minutes? I say no. So it's really in a more informal body, and I'm just trying to clean up the language a little bit to reflect that sort of hopefully efficiency that one would get from a working group.
Well, and the sentence merely preceding the 3rd paragraph, the last sentence in the 2nd paragraph of this says, formal agendas and minutes will not be produced.
Right.
So I think, we have that already in the committee terms of reference. And so they're basically saying that a working group is, for lack of a better word, but it's also in here, is informal. There will be no formal agendas, no formal minutes. And I think also what's very important is there will not necessarily be attendance by anybody from the clerk's department if we don't have to produce agendas and minutes. It'd only be if the subject matter was relevant to the clerk's department that they would be in attendance.
Right, and if we're talking about matter A or B or Z, whatever it is, the working group would call in a staff member if they were willing to attend and advise on a particular matter. Sort of do that as opposed to always have to be in attendance.
Yes.
So it's really just we're looking for a way to be more efficient with our time when it comes to small to medium-sized projects. So are there any questions about what I'm suggesting here? I would like to just sort of say that what I'm trying to do is have a discussion here and then make sure that we go through some of the language that I provided and maybe make sure that we achieve that sort of efficiency for this group.
Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you. I appreciate all this. And of course, this is a procedural bylaw, but I presume that if a working group is an informal gathering in a sense, in other words, if a bunch of interested parties, including some members of council, but not a quorum of council, presumably, wanted to work on something, they could sit down and work on it. And if they needed the assistance of somebody from staff, then they could request availability and work out timing on all that. So is this something that needs to be, is this come as a formal request from council, or is this as a result of an interested group of people, including councillors, getting together and working on a specific project?
I think really all I was trying to achieve here was to bring it forward, to get some feedback and get your support to make sure that we work with working groups from time to time and maybe lift some of the medium-sized loads off staff from time to time. That was the objective here.
Again, I guess the only, I think, specific guideline would be you cannot have more than so many council members as part of that group to avoid quorum, right?
I would like to encourage everyone to look at page 5 of 12 in the committee terms of reference, because the very first sentence says a working group will be utilized when the township, either council or staff, require the expertise and or input from stakeholders, etc. So in other words, it doesn't require council direction.
Right.
It also, it goes on, may be formed at the direction of council or staff, but it doesn't require it. Sure. And it also, again, says formal agendas and minutes will not be produced. So my comment, I guess, is we already have 4 paragraphs in our committee terms of reference on working groups. So I guess my question from this is, do we need an additional paragraph in there or two? Because I think most of what Councillor Cooper is looking for is this somewhat different wording, but is already in there.
Yes, but there's some areas that I can highlight, and that's what I sent in the long report, that say that working groups and committees are a little bit one and the same, and they're really not. That's what I'm trying to get at here. I don't want I think the working group and why governments and bodies use working groups is to be able to work efficiently and quickly on a project, as opposed to that sort of formal approach. And there's some language in which I'm happy to work with Karen on. I just wanted to bring it to your attention, but I'm happy to work on this just to ensure that we make it as flexible and efficient as possible. So it's for your information.
All right, well, I'm going to suggest that what I think would be more useful for us going forward is if we use the current working group section of the committee terms of reference, and then what should be added to that to better achieve the goal of having working groups as an informal group because I guess my confusion is, well, I read through the 9 pages. I certainly appreciated the 1-page summary, but I think most of what's in there is already in under working groups. So we already have them defined.
And some of I don't want to get into the weeds here, but some of the verbiage in there is taking us closer to committee as opposed to what typically a working group does. So I can identify that, and some of that is in the longer report. It has been identified.
I think it would be very useful if you could provide that to us or our clerk, so that therefore we can create going forward a motion to make changes to the committee terms of reference, as if we, presuming we're agreeable to whatever it is. Councillor
I'm happy to do that. And Councillor Hazelton, did you want to say something?
Well, I thank you for recognizing me.
This is Cow. Don't forget to turn on your mic.
Move.
It's already on.
Okay, I think if I could, by reference of example, Councillor Graziano wanted to structure a working group to talk about waste. And sadly, that never materialized. And perhaps the reason why is because the current terms of reference in paragraph 2 on page 5 of 12 says that working groups may be formed at the direction of council or staff, which sort of implies that we as council have to define the working group. I agree it doesn't have to be that way, but it's implied, and so maybe there's a resistance for us to jump up and down and say I'm creating a working group. We have in our March meeting stated that we're going to have working groups to deal with water quality testing, and yet we as council didn't form a working group at the direction of council or at the direction of staff. And so perhaps if I can read between the lines here, I think there's an expectation here that maybe we either shouldn't have. Maybe we should just say, hey, I'm taking control of the situation. I'm going to form a working group. I'm going to bring in other people to work on it. But I think where Councillor Cooper is going is he's highlighting all this great autonomy and independence of what a working group can be and what it can do. And yet we have that one statement in there that it's formed at the direction of, and I think that may be inconsistent with what Councillor Cooper is trying to say.
Well, I'm going to respond with A, it says may be formed, and B, my recollection of Councillor Graziano's request was for a committee. He wanted a waste committee, and waste committee, the word committee means it's not a working group.
Fine.
And to me, that's a very significant and important difference.
Accepted. I think what I'm struggling with, and I think if I can offer what maybe Councillor Cooper is struggling with, is we see huge value in establishing and using a working group structure, but we're hesitant to jump into that structure, and I'm not quite sure the reason why. And maybe it's the May statement, maybe kind of thing. I don't know, but I think what Councillor Cooper's trying to do is raise the visibility of it and get us thinking with more autonomy, if you will, as an individual councillor, don't have to have the approval of my peers or of staff. I can pull together a working group and start doing something.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yeah, I think we're all trying to say the same thing, and whether or not the current committee terms of reference is exactly right or not, or has the nuance, but I think the intent is the same, and that word may, and I think that difference between may and shall is one of those things that we are supposed to recognize in our documents, that there's nothing preventing a working group to be formed informally without the direction from council or staff, and I think that's good thing. But the only thing that we need to realize is that when we have a working group, that might mean that membership is completely dynamic because we don't have an appointment of membership, and I think it's unfortunate Councillor Graziano wasn't able to participate in this part of the conversation, but I think we've talked about both a committee and a working group to deal with waste management. And the challenge with a working group is if I think his intention is to have Commissioner Steele or others participate in that group. But if it's an informal group, I can see there's a reluctance for them to either participate fully or consistently based on schedule and what the group is doing. So I think we can move forward with the wording we have to have an informal group talking about waste management. But then the question is how much participation will come out of that if it's not recognized as an ongoing commitment.
Sorry, just to clarify there, there's going to be all sorts of requirements and needs for committees, and you will have to set up a committee and so make a selection of the committee members, which is also, by the way, sort of cumbersome. It takes time. You've got to do notifications and on it goes. And so there are reasons for that, but equally, there are reasons for not really needing to go through a selection process per se. And it's not a committee of council. It's a working group. And I think that's where the beauty of it is, in a sense, that you can move quickly, deal with an issue, and get on with life. And I think some of our verbiage, and I'm happy to work with Karen on that, but some of our verbiage is a little bit skewed to trying to make a working group a bit like a committee, and it's not the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you. C.O. Mariotti.
A quick question to Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cooper, when you talk about a working group, are you also expecting to have a quorum of councillors on it, or a maximum of 3?
Not at all.
Okay.
It might be just one councillor.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. I'm glad we clarified that. I mean, I see the working group as a think tank. Councillor Cooper, you have your working group already on with the Bill Davis Center. So we know that if there is a want and a need for a councillor to wish to set up a working group or a member of staff, I know Mr. Sokash will be reaching out to the community associations to talk about the parking issue. That in itself is deemed to be a working group. I think that we have the flexibility if we're all working together, and if councillors will, at council say, hey, I'd like to explore this option, and I'm thinking of setting up a working group, and I'd like the support of staff out in the open. I believe that the current procedure that we have would allow for that. But I mean, if there's additional wording that you'd like in there, that's perfectly fine. But I think what we have seems to work.
Yeah. May I suggest that Councillor Cooper set up a working group to discuss working groups?
Oh boy. The hell with that, but we're never going to get it done. But anyway, I just wanted to make you aware of making sure that we have that kind of flexibility that we're talking about here, and the formality that goes with a regular committee isn't really necessary with something like this. So that was the objective.
All right, so we're not really having a motion coming out of this.
No, and even your working groups may make a recommendation to council, but they don't have the power to do anything. It's an advisory group.
Yes. I mean, and your example of the planning working group you created a year ago, it's a good one. You did some work. The staff accommodated you with space as opposed to clerical support.
Right.
And you made a report to council. I thought that was a perfect example of a working group.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to suggest, because I see no more hands, that I don't read a motion because we don't have one, and then move straight on to. Sorry. Yes. move on to adjourning our committee of the whole, and then give everybody an opportunity to de-link and relink so we can continue the planning council meeting. So with that, I have moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole does now adjourn at 4:34 p.m. Thank goodness we extended this meeting. And why don't my pens don't work? Okay, 4:34 p.m. to reconvene on May 14th, 2024, or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? All right, that is carried. Thank you very much. So now we log out. We have to log back in, and I believe